And we love to have anybody who'd be perfect for contractors, HOA board members, all of you, anybody, municipal school districts, anybody who is thinking about or interested or actively pursuing data graphs conversions or as a program manager. So feel free to contact me first.
Thank you so much. So just as we hit record, I'll just kind of lead up to that. A few things that may be coming up that this group might weigh in on or get a little input around would be the native grass handbook, and we just heard from Colorado Springs Utilities on July 27th and 28th. There'll be a 9 to 4 native grass education workshop. So maybe that we'll talk about the handbook a little bit as well. Water-wise, Colorado Water-wise is working through CWCB funding to update the best management practices manual, and there's a virtual event on July 26th. Pretty much that, and we'll probably have them out. A couple of really cool things I think we might aim this group for just feedback on the exploratory analysis that CWCB working on and maybe try to update. And then also we did have a grant come through. We'll see if it actually is approved in advance. If it does, then maybe an opportunity to weigh on a survey to look at kind of public opinion around sort of around state administration. So those are some of the things on the horizon, and I'm going to turn things over to Jen on our team. We heard from that last time to give a quick recap where we're at and some things that have been on.
I don't hear it here, but
Okay, everything's online as well. Thanks. For sure, programs, how can we best support that capacity building? How can local policy restricting turf installation be considered? How do these local policies complement turf replacement? What can facilitate the scale and impact of turf replacement? And then finally, how to actually define non-essential turf.
All of those, right? Like all
of them, painstaking detail.
Because how does
So just wanted to provide an update on the state's turf replacement program. We had 39 eligible entities that have applied, and we are in the process of contracting. We have been able to issue 9 of those CEOs, and we have a 4-5 split right now between programs that are putting together turf rebate programs and then others that have identified site-specific areas of high water use that they will be removing and replacing the turf. We, CWCB, have been collecting data on the estimated square footage that has been provided, the potential water savings, as well as the real cost, meaning the administrative costs, removal, replacement, all the things that go into it. So we get more of a concrete idea of what the operation actually look like and cost at the end of the day. Cycle 2 is opening this Saturday, and it will be open until August 31st. We are expecting it to be quite competitive just due to limited funding and the interest that we had in the first round. Anybody here is interested in applying, the person to talk to, please talk to me if you know of anyone else who is interested in applying and maybe have some questions. I'm happy to talk with them as well, so feel free to pass them my way and we'll have some chats. And just so that anyone who is interested in applying knows, we will be prioritizing new applicants. So if you received money in the first round, you're still welcome to apply, but we will be prioritizing people who haven't received funding yet, just so we can spread it out a little bit more. So if you were at the Drought Summit, first, thank you for coming. But also you've seen this slide before, but we feel as though it is important to reiterate the price tag is turf removal. And while it is unknown how much turf removal or how much turf is right for removal within Colorado, there are estimates based on that BBC turf analysis report that we found with the CWCB that shows some of the cost reductions that are connected with it. So if we were to remove 30% of the turf in Colorado at $5 per square foot, it would cost about $3.5 billion over the next 10 years. That's looking at $350 million annually, which side by side with our turf replacement program for 2 years, which was funded with $2 million. We're a little bit short on what we need, which is why we're all here, right? Is to talk about other tools that we can use in collaboration. Turf replacement is absolutely a piece of the puzzle, but trying to figure out how it fits with the rest of that scheme. And then again, if you're looking at the predicted water savings, which will of course vary by region, the estimate from that same BBC report is around 20,000 acre feet. And according to the Colorado Water Plan, the potential gap in supply and demand is 704,000 acre feet. So putting the numbers of dollars next to the savings again reiterates why we're all here in talking about what we're about. So we've been hearing a lot of conversations, both in the last meeting and then also just talking with people about what we're looking at when we think about turf replacement. Apologies for a lot of words on the side, but there's a lot of conversation, which is great. Certainly not comprehensive, but just some food for thought for our conversation today. So first, single family lots may be more expensive to replace than larger lots. It's just that economy of scale of what can be removed all at once. If you're doing a bunch of lots in different areas, it's going to inherently cost more money. There's also a potential issue with free riders who might be planning to remove their turf anyway, and then an incentive program comes up, they're going to be the first in line to get there because they were already spending on removing their turf. So it's money that we might be funding that maybe we could have used up their own funding to replace. Just the rebates do inherently sort of target those larger water users who have that incentive internally to be able to replace their turf and save water, but then kind of getting a double bonus for that rebate as well. There are areas with no or limited greenery that may cause additional water use, especially in the short term, even with turf replacement. There will likely be additional water use in the short term as those roots start to establish. Irrigation changes could be an effective tool in reducing water use and waste. There are capacity concerns for building out local rebate programs. It takes time to put together a program if you haven't started one yet. And for those of you who have them, know that it doesn't happen overnight. So there's some lag time between having an idea and actually implementing it. We've heard this come up quite a few times that the alternative to turf has to be easy. It has to be accessible. The barrier is that much larger than putting down turf grass. People aren't going to be willing to do it. There also needs to be some sort of market change in the available of these drought tolerant vegetation. There are the big box stores carrying them. Do they have an incentive to carrying them? Are people buying them from them? Are they going to a local nursery? Kind of thinking about that dynamic. And then finally, targeting specific areas where turf is not essential could be more helpful than doing the definition the other way around. So looking at quote unquote obvious areas that are not essentially mediums, the stormwater potential basins, etc. So just rolling into that, as we're thinking about that definition of non-essential turf today, it's helpful to kind of recognize and understand how non-essential turf is defined elsewhere. And I know Rick and Tim will likely talk about that more with their local definitions, but you know, California, Las Vegas, Utah all have their definitions that aren't that different, but then there are some nuances in there, and of course, leaving the room for anything that is outside of the realm, so there's always exceptions to the rule. So really considering that and what angle we were looking at it as we're going into these discussions. And then there are, of course, lessons to learn. Colorado is different than all of these examples, but there are things that I think we can pull out and have a conversation. First, Utah's landscape incentive program, which was launched this year, is quite well funded. They received $8 million this year, and they will have a continual $3 million every year going forward. They also have landscape codes that are built in, so if utilities are applying for money to then develop rebate programs, they have to include the landscape codes that are set up. They also have very intensive site evaluation visits, so they're visiting a turf removal before and then after, and doing a bunch of monitoring on the ground, which is we go back to that capacity issue, that's another piece of that puzzle. And they, are also, the utilities are able to set the rebate programs and the amounts for their different values based on where they are. On the completely opposite end of the spectrum, Phoenix, Arizona, they have never offered turf rebates before. They instead were aggressive with their tiered rate structures, and they would charge their customers more in the summer months that incentivized them enough to remove turf. But in the late 70s, they reported that 80% of the homes in the area had turf, and that percentage is now down to 14%. So they did not have to put in any extra money into those rebate programs, which is, we all know, quite expensive, costly, time expensive as well. They were able to lower and adjust by those incentives from the customers. I mean, they those higher rates in the summer. And then finally, Las Vegas, Nevada, which I'm sure we've all talked about and heard about. Thank you, Fran, for sending the article from ProPublica recently about the geospatial analysis that they did, which they did for quite a few years to figure out that helped them define not just turf flood, but also help them figure out how much water savings they had coming. They grossly overestimated how much turf they had to remove. They estimated that they had 3,900 acres to remove in the next 6 years, and that's going to be more like 1,100 acres. So it's just a lesson to think about as we're having these discussions with putting all your eggs in one basket, but we're going to do turf removal and then being surprised on the other side, even though they did the geospatial analysis and had time to get their things changed. So just something to think about as we're all moving forward. And with that, I will pass it off to Marta. That's for me. I'm here all day and here going forward. So reach out if you have any more questions about turf removal. I'm happy to chat. So thank you.
And Marta, before you
Yeah, moving out of the way. I will try.
well, no, it's
So random to agree. Everyone, just because we've not all met 100 times, I think it'd be really valuable to, before I dive into what we're doing today, a quick round of introductions. So why don't we start on this side, just name, title, and we'll just roll through the room and then we could do the online after.
Kat Weissmiller, Colorado Water Conservation Board. I'm the Deputy Section Chief in Water Supply Planning. Jeff, again.
Hi, I'm Emily Madrid. I'm the water planning and private impact specialist for CWCB.
Everybody, Tim, your water.
Good morning, everybody. Pat McMeekin, Parks and Palms, President.
I'm Lindsay Rogers, the water policy analyst, resource advocate. So, we're going to have water conservation.
We hear about Barbara, so I just want to introduce myself and both based here in the street, Chumchula, in the Mountain Park District, and I'm the development services director there.
That's great. He's assistant director for urban ecology and trails for the parks.
Morning, Drew Beckwith. I run the conservation program in the city of Westminster.
Hi, I'm Amy McFarland. I'm the water efficiency coordinator.
Good morning, I'm Lisa Darling, I'm the Executive Director of the South Central Water Supply.
Rick Schultz, Water Efficiency Supervisor, Town of Castle Rock Water.
Good morning, friends. I'm Frank Kinder, Water Efficiency and Sustainability Manager for Northern Water.
And online, we have.
Hi, I'm Austin Troy, University of Colorado, Denver.
Hi, Greg Fisher with Denver Water.
Kate Larson with Resource Central.
Good morning, John McMahon, the Associated Landscape Contractors of Colorado.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Breezemore. Amy Moyer from the River District is on her way, but she's having car trouble, so she'll be there soon. But I'm going to be filling in for Amy as when she goes on maternity leave in August. So I'm listening in for her today.
Hi, I'm Mariel Miller. I'm the Water Conservation Manager with Fort Collins Utilities.
Local governments are taking an approach for implementing this, some of you were using it as well, you're putting limits on the amount of water available in terms of like walking budget in which total acre feet in order to get a tap or to get a permit. The other is this location on where turf goes, which is this long discussion around the definition of non-functional or non-essential. And it's essentially looking at public landscapes, streetscapes, stormwaters, locations. And so it's talking about the locations. There are, and I will let Tim and Rick talk a little more about how they're uniquely using it to say in this space or not in this space for residential, which is usually excluded from these larger policies. Quantity would be square footage. And then there are less limits on the type of turf which fits into plant groups. But there are limits on prohibitions on bluegrass. There are requirements for turf to be certain more drought resistant grass types, and we talk less about what others consider that. The third, or the last piece is around this region of applicability and who do these apply to? California, as an example, and easy enough because I was just there, so it's at the top of my mind, but they, you know, put this prohibition on water source, but it only applies to commercial, industrial, and HOAs. Well, not to HOAs, but trying to apply to HOAs. So landscape codes often have long lists of applicability, and it's both new development and sometimes redevelopment. And so, you know, when we're talking about applicability, the whole reason we're talking about turf replacement program is it makes absolutely no sense to pay people a lot of money to remove turf, yet your new development is coming in and you're just going zero it out as new turf is being installed. So this connection between these policies, these programs, and policies within the land use authority are trying to remind us to make those investments maximized. And you guys probably know all of this. And there's one more point I want to make, which was, I remember what it was. Has to do with policy. I don't know, but it's literally, it wasn't, they'll come back to me as I probably explain our instructions. So instructions for today, you're going to go into breakouts. We'll have an online breakout team. Team C will have 2 breakouts in the room, team A and team B. Team A is going to be over there. Team B is going to be back there. You're going to answer 3 questions within the first, before lunch. That's the goal. That's the way it plans. I have a backup, a contingency plan, should that not happen. The way it will work, sorry about that, but I'll walk you through it. You have flip charts. You're going to nominate a team lead who's going to be your facilitator of sorts, your team leader. Your fearless leader, select a fearless leader amongst yourselves. I'd like you to have one person be responsible for helping do the recording. And I will be kind of helping you move through the process, answering any questions, keeping you on time. If this works as planned, yeah, I have a backup. You'll be spending around 50 minutes on Q1. You'll spend about 35 minutes or so, maybe 45 on the policy question, and then 20 minutes, probably you only need 20 to say, do you need a definition or do you not need a definition? And if so, what would we change? That's your last question. So the first 2 questions allocate the majority of your time there. Our goal is to get a rough set of information down. We'll walk you through the specifics of how you're going to do that. We're going to lunch at the boat house, which is across the park. At 12:30, I think November 8th. We'll return here at 1:30 and we'll go back into your breakouts. If you finish this morning, fingers crossed. If not, we'll kind of maybe skip the bottom part. My goal is to have you cross-pollinate after lunch and sort of look at what each of you has come up and find those commonalities, and then we'll come back and put plenary for the end of the day. If you don't get far enough for lunch, I will modify before lunch. I will modify what we do at 1:30. The online group, we were participating online in a virtual breakout, and we're hoping that we'll be able to bring you in to also participate in the process. We're going to test it out. Technology does not always work this plan, but I do my best. So I created flip charts with you that essentially look like this. There are 3 flip charts for each question. The first one is your individual responses. And what I'd like you to do is take 5 minutes for each question. You're roll through each question one at a time. So question 1, do all of it, then proceed to question 2, do all of it, then proceed to question 3, do all of it. Within each question are 3 components. An individual kind of quick 5-minute brainstorm, one idea for post-it note. Those of you that did the homework, you do not have to rewrite it, just make sure that you leave me your notes. Because I'm going to collate all of this. First one is, what do you think individually about this question? You'll go around one by one after and share your thoughts, and then collate your ideas into group recommendations. What do you kind of all agree on? Where's your agreement? And put those on the chart. That is what we will share when we do presentation back. I also want you to be thinking about maybe capturing, are you talking about any specific roles on which the CWCB can play to help accelerate capacity building and impact on the ground? So that's for every question, same process, you're essentially repeating it 3 times. I have these instructions printed out to each of you on the table so that you can follow along. A question on the process, and then I remembered what my thought was. Does it seem simple enough? Ready for the task? Okay. We're gonna do a quick panel before we go into breakouts, kind of share some wisdom. And then the one thing I kind of wanted to add around, CWCB is got their eye on the prize at state level, right? They're looking at all of our opportunities, how we meet the gap. Those of you that are working at the local level know that while even I might not be the largest percentage of water in the state, hence water savings from irrigation is very small. Most of you know that in your local portfolio, that's 50% of your water, and resiliency is completely tied to it. So there might be ways in which we're talking at different scales when we're talking about savings, and to sort of be thinking about that. The other thing I think is important in thinking about the turf replacement programs is that many communities use this as a demonstration. And so the goal of their program might not always be maximizing savings by highest water users. It might be, we need to shift the perception. And so thinking about the different outcomes of turf replacement programs in those 2 contexts, because they're both happening and they're both important. Because one of the barriers to accelerating changes in Colorado landscapes, being able to show people what a alternative is and not replace us. So I just want to reflect those different state level, local level difference and how you work this. So with that, I'm going to ask, I was gonna have you guys sit up here, but maybe it's just easier, Tim, if you would go first. Where are you? There you are. Take off the reading glasses to look far. To come up, share first, we'll follow with Rick. Have Kate do maybe a response, and you guys can ask questions after each speaker does any clarifying questions, and then we'll move on to that.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Something I could go first, and I can just say whatever I said.
That's why you're going first, Kevin.
So you can do it.
So I can do that.
Yeah, thanks. So I took all of my notes. There was a couple things that came up a little earlier that I wanted to address since I had a microphone without other slides. One of them was changes hard. I agree, but I think it's getting a lot easier. I talked about this at one of the things I talked about recently. We are seeing a big shift. Participation requests have skyrocketed for all of our programs. And so I think we're at that place where I think we're at that place where it's time, right? People are thinking about water conservation and want to be involved. And the second one was the lead by example. Well, that was I think that's crucial for those of you that have the opportunity, depending on how the organization is set up. The World Water was fairly lucky being part of the city, so we have a lot of impact on our parks department. We get to work with planning. Leading by example is very, very, very important step for the activity. So we were asked to talk a little bit about our programs. One of the cool things with being first, or being early, and having some of these programs, is you get to celebrate your success. The other not cool thing is you're the first ones to screw up. You've certainly done that as well. So Laura has had water conservation, landscape requirements and rebate programs for about 15 years. And so they've always kind of gone in a way. New development early on was really interesting. So back in the early 2000s, the planning decided they were going to put some water conservation requirements into our landscape code. It was pretty small. And when we look at the residential sector, that wasn't even a requirement. It was, we finally had an option. So before then, you had to preserve it. I mean, it seems silly now, but there was a requirement you code when you build a house, you got to preserve it. And so we put in this turf option. And nobody did it, and I'm gonna get the developer and and so in the conservation theory, we said, well, we're incentivizing, and I'll talk about our rebate program a little bit, but for the redevelopment side, we said, okay, well, let's incentivize the development community to do this. That started back in 2013, I think. I started in 2012 with more water. And so we said, well, let's go to the builders, not the developers, but sometimes the developers, but the people actually building the house, and let's offer them money. And incentive to not put turf in the front of it. And I've used the statistic in almost every time I talk to you, 10 years, I had 9 properties there. 9 out of probably 20,000 homes built. And so from the new development side, that's what we got into our ordinance this past year, which now prohibits turf in front yards, allowing the backyards, prohibits it in this tree lawn, which hopefully we'll call that tree lawn at some point. Creates our landscape areas we'll move into, what land keep up with, but it works. Same with commercial and multi-family. If we talk about the designation, yeah, we kind of have one, but it's been that study. There's non-functional or functional and others like that. So that's new for us. We haven't really seen effects of that yet. I mean, so lessons learned other than get out and talk to people that are thinking of doing something that big. We won't see for about 3 years, probably because of the grandfathering part of it, which always happens in development. We haven't seen those communities really built yet, although some have done voluntarily. So that's kind of the policy side. The rebate side, we've also been doing for about 15 years, and that's probably where we learned the most. So we started the traditional, it was before my time there. I don't even remember what the dollars per square value was, but that's a pretty standard option. You take out the term and you get X amount of dollars per foot. At the time, we had contracted with the landscape architecture firm that we designed, it was very expensive. And participation was low, and it's actually really low for the last couple of years. We can take that program, but one of the biggest lessons learned is be flexible and be changes. Our program, we hear this from customers all the time, there's some other great programs in the state. Our program is fairly different. Difficult for the customer to get through, it's administratively intensive. And so we're always looking for ways to make it easier for the customer, easier for staff with one thing in mind. Are we still meeting our goal? So very, very important to set goals up first. You make the goal. The goal is pretty simple, right? We want to get rid of certain water. Well, it's not really that simple. If we look at the Southern Nevada Water Quality Program, which is been super successful in saving water, if we were to just say our main goal is to save water, and the requirements of our program would be extremely low. We wouldn't care about plant coverage, we wouldn't care about creating renewable landscapes, we would care about return. That's it. And that's not our goal. So it's really important to say, what is our goal? What do we want? And I think that's part of the student, right? What do we solve in this taking out? Defining that first, to set the goal, then develop a program that is the easier for everybody and most simple to achieve that goal. Because I can make my program a lot more simple to achieve my goal. So finding that out. And then be willing to evaluate your successes and your failures so that you happen and make changes. We take our program almost every year. And I know that sounds crazy, and every year I talk to my team, and I'm like, we used to be saying that for like 2 years, that was so long. Because it costs money every time we change. It costs more money every time we change. But it's okay. It's okay. We know this is expensive, we want to make sure we're doing the right thing by our customer. I'm trying to get through my goal this year. So those are probably my two biggest lessons learned. Make sure you set the goal, be very flexible, define how simple can you make it while you're still meeting your goals. And then be willing to take the time to analyze and change your program. There was some discussion on cost, I will admit, it is expensive. Something I talked about yesterday at this full week presentation in terms with a bunch of elected officials is one of the things we're trying to do is identify those areas where it's not as expensive. It's not expensive everywhere. And the work that Colorado Springs Union today draft manual is so awesome because if we look at spaces where we can do this for a lot cheaper, it's not $5 a square foot. Our park department estimates for native conversions, if the irrigation is already set up in a way that makes sense for the data, is about $10,000 a year. A little bit cheaper than $5 a square foot. So how do we, and maybe that's another question for this group, does everything have equal value, right? Or can we find those spaces where it makes sense and really put effort into these conversions? It doesn't mean you can't do residential alongside with it, in parallel. But can we focus our energy on places and target those places where the value is higher, makes the most sense, and then can we maybe use some savings from those offset due to more expensive stuff later? It's not getting cheap. So if we want to wait, we can. It's just going to be more expensive later. So I think finding out how we do it from a perspective and balancing those things is really, really important. We have one community in Aurora, similar idea, but it's not removing cheaper for them paying for more expensive turf, but changing their water system. So they're currently on anybody who's in the kind of metro area, the Eagle Bend Metro District, they golf or they go over on the raw water. And they have a bunch of potable water for all of their common areas. They said, well, what if we tie in all of this stuff in the raw line? And then we'll promise to use the savings in the water costs and the water conservation conversion that the common space that was previously irrigated. That's what they do. Save us a bunch of money and we do what we want and do what they want. Another thing unique, I think to Aurora on some of these projects that do carry out their costs is from the utility perspective, how do you ensure the money they can use to do it for ratepayers or development, right? One of the two that should be done next year. So how do you ensure that you're not just one of the things we do for one of the properties that I get a very large rebate is they sign an agreement saying we convert X amount of square feet, we give them the money and their allocation of the building system changes. If they don't meet that new allocation based on the savings potential, they now get a penalty on their water bills for paying the rebate back. So it's a way to be responsible with the money while still pushing for these for your production. I think that's all it. Great. You probably heard that like 5 times.
Are you taking questions?
Sure. Yes.
Okay, question. So the penalty system that you have where you charge them back the rebate amount, does that kind of take the place of like a water budget, right? Or a budget-based rate system for commercial? Or what's your thought on that? Could that be a property or?
Yeah. So currently, I guess it's important to talk about how previously built multifamily, well, particularly, this really comes into place with that common space. So it's a great example, common space is built out in development. So prior to 2021, those allocations, well, that's how far back we want to go. But either an allocation is set back in the old days, it was set by meter size, which was still based on an allocation. Then it was set based on landscape type, which is still how we do it. But there was no agreement, there was no allocation in the agreement. They made their fee around allocation to those so that if they exceeded that annual allocation, they went to tier 2. Big deal. It's like $1 per 1,000 gallons, right? They don't really care. So under the new system, and this actually happens for any new irrigation meter installed in the city and any new multifamily meter, well, multifamily requirement irrigation rate for the landscape. And it's the same allocation period we use for the bigger rebates. And it says, here is your allocation. If you exceed it in the first half of the year, you pay about double the rate for the remainder of the year. Triple if you exceeded in the first half of the year. If you exceeded in the second half, you pay double for the remainder of the year that resets. Don't ask me how we came up with sugar and water race guy, it didn't make any sense, to me, so I definitely will be able to make sense. But yeah, it's the same kind of idea, right? It's how steep is that mountain? Because if it's not steep, it doesn't make a difference. But when you're charging triple the rate or even double, it makes a difference for everybody.
Thank you. And then it's off. This.
Is that accurate? Thank you. Okay. Thank you. So. Few random thoughts at the rock, and trust me when I say that I can tie all these random thoughts together. So they won't quite seem like random, but you know, we get calls all the time and they say, Rick, how do you do this? How do you do that? Or why have you been so successful? And I just shake my head and I say, well, you know, I didn't do anything. It wasn't me, you know, it was us. And what I mean by that is you gotta have the support of management. You gotta have the support of your political body, whoever that is. In the case of Castle Rock, that's our water commission, and that's our town council, and our town manager. And that's essentially how things work. So, you know, we could have all these great ideas, and, you know, we could throw them out there, and, you know, without the support of those guys, none of them are gonna work. So I think that's a starting point is, you know, you kind of have to ask yourself, where am I in the process? You know, where am I? How do I fit in that? And regardless of how good your idea is, or how good you might believe that your idea is, can you sell it? You have the support of the people that you really need supporting you, because without that, you're just gonna die on the front lines, and you're gonna be like Tim and I, and then the first people through are the bloodiest, and that's just how it works. But we're very, very fortunate that we have those. So I kind of want to open that, but then kind of like similar to what Tim talked about. We've got some programs they're pretty good. Voluntary programs, they start with rebates. We've had those rebate programs in place for a long time. I started with the town in 2007, and there was already a rebate program in place before I got there. And so, you know, what I was able to do was just look at that program and say, okay, which one of these rebates or which ones are working, which ones are not working. And it's constantly reevaluated. You know, you can't just say, well, what used to work is always going to work. It doesn't happen that way. Circumstances change, needs change, the will of the community changes. So you listen to the people. I think that's the second lesson that we have to do is we have to listen. You know, to say, what do people want? Because if you can figure out what people want, you don't really have to sell it. They already want it. And, you know, so then you just say, well, okay, well, Kat wants this. How do I get this to her? Because my whole job is to make Kat happy. That's my goal, right? If not, it should be. It's not really my goal. I'm sure we'll talk later, but it's not my goal. But the real thing is, what do people want? Well, one of the things we've been hearing from people all the time is the residents. Our residents have been saying, now I get to look over it. The developer in the room, again, I get to pick on you. Sorry to going right past Tim. But here's the thing, you know, why do developers do what they do? We could ask him. I think, and a lot of the community, maybe this isn't fair, a lot of the community says, well, why do you let the builders put this in if you're just gonna pay us to rip it out? That's the question we get almost daily. Why do you let them put it in and then you're gonna pay us to rip it out? Does that make any sense? So we had a little conversation. This is a quick story. I love to tell this story because it makes a lot of sense, I think. So I had someone call me just about a month ago, 2 months ago. They said that was the very same question, brand new house. And they came in and they said, well, I'm in a brand new house. I'm over in such and such a neighborhood. And I don't want a lawn. But my builder tells me I have to have a lawn. said, well, wait a minute, you don't want it. They say you have to have it. I said, well, let's just approach this a little different. I won't use any names here, I won't tell you who the builder was, it's not relevant, because most builders are the same anyway. And I'm generalizing, I apologize, but kind of what we see, most landscapers are kind of the same too. So I called the landscaper and I said, here, you're installing this landscape for this builder, so such and such a person over here to me, she doesn't want a lawn. So I worked with the foreman of the landscape contractor, and he said, well, you know, Rick, how about this? The homeowner doesn't want it. What if I'm on my way over to this homeowner's house and the truck just gets lost? I say, cool. You know, trucks get lost all the time. Just look at Amazon, right? How many people order things? Oh, different story. So, long story short, we worked it out. The homeowner didn't have to have a lawn. It got lost on the way over there. And it never got solved. Therefore, they never had to rip it out. Labor saved, product saved. Everybody wins. I don't know what they ever did. They probably didn't know. They probably just thought it got installed. I don't know. But I think the point is, Tim mentioned flexibility. Tim mentioned adaptability and always be willing to change. And I think that's the point of the story is what works. What makes a great idea? I don't know. I think I know. Actually, I think I know the answer to that. What makes a great idea? I've had a lot of great ideas that have never taken off, that I thought they were great. Maybe the reason they weren't great is because it was the wrong idea at the wrong time under the wrong set of circumstances, therefore it wasn't great. So what if I had the same idea under new circumstances where now things are changing? Now all of a sudden it's the same idea, but now Pat says that's great. Just because things have changed. So back to where we came from and to tie all these things together, I promised you that I would. So rebate programs been involved since before I got there in the 2000s, great. They've changed, they've shifted, they've adjusted. We've lost some, we've added some. We've lost some because they're no longer relevant. Why are we going to pay someone a rebate for a high efficiency washing machine when they're going to go buy it anyway? So we got rid of it. Don't need it anymore. So it's kind of like that. Where's Jenna? You were talking about the free riders, right? The free riders, those are the people who are going to do this anyway. Why are we going to pay you if you're going to go do it anyway? We're just going to let you do it. Everybody wins. So that's the first piece is the rebate. Second piece is the rates. And we tie the rebates and the rates together. We have a water budget rate structure. It's a tiered rate structure. There's 4 tiers for residential. And so you have indoor, outdoor, excess, and then an arbitrary conservation surcharge for anybody that goes over 40,000 gallons. So that's just how our rate structure is set up. That ties together with the rebate program, because when you participate in our turf removal, which by the way we call Colorado State, we used that term several years ago, and I've heard it gaining some popularity, and so that's cool. It's great. I love it. Feel free to steal it and use it everywhere you want. We're happy to share it. But the reason these two things tie together is because when you participate in the Colorado State rebate, your irrigated area is getting smaller. Well, guess what? We're going to do a water budget adjustment to your rate structure. So now as your irrigated area gets smaller, we note that on your bill, on your account, and therefore your tiers have now changed. They've now been adjusted, as they should. We don't want to penalize anybody by giving them too small a budget, but we want you to have the right budget for the amount of area that you're actually irrigating and the plant material that you're actually irrigating. So that's how those two things tie together. Now, shifting gears real quick, go to the new construction side of things. Way back in 07, 08, 09, you guys may remember there was a whole thing back then, there was a recession going on, some economic downturns back then. And so development took a hit. So we got together with our development community and we said, how can we help you? We want to incentivize you. We want to make sure that everybody wins here, because if you're not building, if we're not growing, then nobody wins. Cool, well, and the years arrived. So we came up with this great thing called the 0.67 program. tell you briefly what it is. The 0.67 program basically is, it's 0.67 or 67% of the system development fee. So we have this fee structure. And it's so awesome. I brought a copy of it. This is our fee structure. It only takes 12 pages to tell you about it. So if anybody wants a copy, you can have all 12 pages, or it's on our website. But this is how we have to work with our development community, because navigating your way through 12 pages of just fees is not the easiest thing in the world. So it's easy for people to get lost. But we said, great, 0.67. What does that mean? You come to me, you want to build a house. We're going to look at your fixture unit calculations. We're going to add all these things in, and we're going to assign the highest demand for your irrigation zone. And then if you qualify under a certain threshold, then you do get 8.67 or 67% of the system development fees. And that was a pretty good discount. Back to the lessons learned. I gave you a couple lessons learned already, but one of the lessons learned with the 0.67 program, it was horrible. From my perspective, it was great for you because you got a discount. It was horrible for me because it was an administrative nightmare. It was difficult to track, it was difficult to manage, it's difficult for everybody, and nobody wins except you. You win, because you get the discount. So we since eliminated that program, again, back to Tim's point. Why do something if it doesn't make sense? Evaluate it, look at it, see if it's going to work. If it doesn't work, or if there's no longer a need for it, get rid of it. So we got rid of it, it's gone. Fast forward to now, where are we today? Similar to Aurora, we have the no turf allowed in front yards for new construction, and we have a maximum of 500 square feet in the backyard. Kentucky bluegrass was prohibited back in 18, so we haven't allowed that for several years. So we've always been moving away from that. Kentucky bluegrass hasn't been allowed on commercial projects for a lot longer than that. But residential since 2018. And again, how does this all tie together? Back to the builder. Another lesson learned. Work with your development community. You need to. You have to work with your development community. You cannot just be a bull in a china shop, closet, whatever the metaphor is. Big closet or small bull, I'm not sure which. But anyway, so you have to work with the people in your community. You know, I mentioned the people on the town side, the water commission, the town council, management. They're all super important because they're the ones that are going to support your program. But equally important are the people on the other side of the fence that are going to be affected by these changes. So you have to work with these guys. We are actively involved in our economic development council and other groups within town. And we get feedback from these guys, literally everyone. And when we don't have a regularly scheduled meeting, we're still talking to these guys offline. Now we've got, under the new program, here's how it works. This is how it differs from Aurora just a little bit. No turf in front yards, true. 500 square feet max in the backyards, true. So those are similarities between us and Aurora. I think where we're different, and Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but we also have a sliding scale on system development fees. And our sliding scale only takes one page. Here's our sliding scale, and it runs from 0.6 or 60% up to 1. So anywhere from 60% of your system development fees up to 100% of your system development fees, depending on where you fall. So here's how you get it. Part of the building permit application process, you have to design the entire landscaping for the whole yard. That's part of the building permit application. We need that before you even get a permit. Once you have an approved plan, you get your permit, you go build. Next requirement, you have to install the front yard. Minimum, you have to install the front yard. You are designing the whole backyard. Again, I told you we were going to tie this together. Why are you designing the whole backyard? Because the water budget for that address is going to be set based on that approved plan. It's set before anybody ever moves into the house. It's set before you build the house. It's set before you sell the house. It's based on that approved plan. So then you might say, well, what if they move in? What if you come in and you buy this house and you say, well, I don't like that plan. I don't want that plan. I want 5,000 square feet of turf, because that's what I want. Fine, put it in. We're not gonna give you a larger water budget, but put it in. Your water budget is already been set based on the original plan, but if you want more, if you want different, you have the ability to do that. So that's where it all ties back to the rates again. So as a builder, how do you get the discount? You get the discount based on if you install the whole thing as designed, you qualify for the discount. If you only opt to do the front yard, you're gonna pay the full SFE, the full SDS, sorry, system development fee, full system development fee. You don't have to install the whole yard, but you're not gonna get the discount if you don't. So I think the last lesson learned is, in addition to the internal support, in addition to the economic side of things and the developer side of things, it's probably equally as important to have a relationship with your HOAs, your management companies, because once this stuff is all built, somebody has to maintain it for the rest of its life. It's there. You get one chance to design it, done. You get one chance to install it, done. And now you've got 30 or 40 years of maintenance. So 30 to 40 years of maintenance to either do it right or to do it wrong. And that's where I think, this is my opinion, the greatest opportunity for success or failure lies with maintenance, because it's there for the rest of your life. So I'm going to close with that. I rambled a little bit, but hopefully I tied it all together. And anybody have any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to go run away and sit down.
We're splitting them up in breakouts so that you can ask more deep questions.
Yes.
Real quick question. So thanks for that, was really helpful. And I think that like the opportunity that you're using to charge these higher water budget based rates and help sectors and to maintain the new landscaping is great. I thought that under your landscape code, you know, Castle is one of the more stronger redevelopment triggers. So just for your example, would it fall within your code to actually go out and install 5,000 feet of turf, or would that be like in most cases, would that be more than 55% of the landscape area of the site?
Oh, you've read the manual. Yes, you have. So what she's talking about, for those of you who are not so fortunate to have read the manual, is there is a trigger in there where you go in and if you're retrofitting or renovating 25% or more of a particular account, that triggers a full retrofit, at which point that account must be brought up to current criteria. So that sort of separates the difference between maintenance and renovation. That's where that 25% comes in.
It is a 25% of the building permit, or would it be building permit plus landscape? Because usually it's triggered at the actual structure, not.
Usually we're not talking structures, we're talking about area or square footage. Yeah. Yeah, it's usually not tied to a building permit at that point because the building's already done. Drew?
To be clear, your residential water rates are budget based.
Yeah.
They can never go, you can never get a higher budget from what you started at, but you can get a lower budget if you participate in a rebate program.
All right.
Are there any other circumstances where you adjust someone's budget?
Sure. So the reality is, don't tell anybody, just what's this thing. So the reality is not everybody's budget is right. It's just not. And I can promise you back when we implemented our water budget rate structure in 08 and 09, we did commercial in 08, we did residential in 09. Back when we did that, everybody's budget was wrong. I'm just gonna say it right out. I'll just admit it. Everybody's budget was wrong. And we said, you know what, we don't care if it's wrong because it's too much, it's too big, it's too large a budget. But we want to get something out there. And I think that's another lesson learned. Thanks, Drew, for tying me into the last lesson learned. The last lesson learned is don't chase perfection because it doesn't exist. It just doesn't happen. We want to get there. Everybody in this room wants to be perfect. And it hurts us when we're not. And landscaping is not a perfect thing. So, yeah, the budget was too big. Who cares? We had a budget, we got something out there. Now we can go in over time and we can adjust, we can flex, we can make it fit. And we're getting better. We're still not there. I mean, I'm gonna be long gone before we're there. But, so thank you for bringing in that point.
We're gonna take a quick question.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was awesome, actually. Every time I hear you guys speak, it's like, keep it simple, too, but it's like the new thing. Kate is online and, you know, provides a different perspective of supporting turf replacement from the capacity support side. And we've asked if she would be willing, she's willing, are you there? Okay, let's not here. To just add a couple of reflections to consider as we head into our discussion. And so, thanks.
All right, I'm assuming everyone can hear me. You can yell if you can't. Yeah, so I think most people are familiar with Resource Central's turf removal program, but I'll give a quick snapshot for those of you that aren't super familiar. So the way our program works is we work with water providers. And I think this year we have about 23 water providers that are currently participating in our program. And each one of them picks a benefit amount. So it's anywhere from, $500 to, $1,200, really, any amount works. And we kind of use that as a discount that people can get when they're applying into the program. We have what we call like the sandbox, where they can, put in their project size, see their benefit amount, and then select a mixture or, one or the other of lawn removal service and garden in a box plants. So the lawn removal service itself, we come with a crew of people, we remove their lawn, take it away, and they're left with a bare dirt patch. And then the garden in a box plants, they just get kind of roped into our normal garden in a box program. They, select a pickup and they come and get their garden in a box to the pickups. So, really most of our customers are, what we call sort of like DIYers. They're people who are looking to do, a pretty, a portion of the work themselves. And they, are just kind of looking for a little bit of support. Some of them, do work with landscapers and kind of combine our program with working with a landscaper. But by and large, a lot of our, I would say the majority of our customers are people who, kind of take our help and then, do the rest on their own. And just to also kind of provide a sense of scale. So our program piloted in 2020 and we did 100 lawn removals. This year we're anticipating working with between 600 and 800 residents to help them remove a portion of their lawn. And again, that's with 23 water provider partners. So that is a 500% increase over 3 years, which is crazy by any business standard. So we're definitely kind of in like startup culture mode, really, every year doing a lot of iteration in the off season and really, like figuring out how we can, really meet the need in the moment and kind of, keep growing our program. So let's see here. So, I think that what our program does well is, people love choices, and that, we kind of had done a study looking at different incentives that we could offer, prior to choosing kind of these two, the lawn removal service and garden in a box. And what we found is that, it's telling people like, this is what you get might work for some people, but saying you could get these two things is really, really helpful, because I think just even sometimes the perception of choice and really letting people feel like they have a part in it and they can kind of customize it really helps. And we've just sort of seen that in like the popularity of our program. And I think that also, through this study that we had done, prior to launching our program, we found, I mean, the turf removal is, I mean, absolutely the most difficult part. It's the part that people have a really hard time both physically doing, but also like conceiving of. It's like that's just sort of the thing that people get stuck on. And so by us, we remove the lawn, and so we're really like pushing them and creating like a lot of momentum for their project. And so, we have, and people like, it's like all of a sudden they just like see it and they're like, okay, now I'm gonna, I get to do kind of the fun part of the planting and those kinds of things. So we're really kind of moving like shoppers to buyers like very quickly, because we're actually coming and physically like, taking away their lawn. And so I think that that's, been really successful. And I think that, for us, the need that we serve in the community is providing these like large scale programs that individual water providers would not be able to do on their own. Like a lot of the cities that participate in our in all of our programs, but particularly this program, it's like Berthoud, Colorado, or Frederick, these smaller communities where it's like there's no way that they don't have 10 people on staff working on water conservation, or even one person working on staff that's responsible for water conservation. And so for them, it's really kind of like filling in the gaps and letting like lots of communities take advantage of programs like this. But the other side of that, from like a program implementation perspective, is for us, like we have to, in order to scale, we have to have like a reasonable amount of similarity across our programs. And some of the programs we piloted in the past have ended up not working out for us because they required a lot of customization. We had 5 communities participating, and each one wanted something a little bit different. And while that is great, and each one, every community is different and might have different needs, in order for us to really be successful in this model, like we need it to be pretty similar, in I'm trying to, like in Lafayette where I live, versus like, Berthoud or Loveland. And so, and this program, there's always like a little bit of, sometimes people are like, hey, can we get this? And we're like, oh, is that something that we can easily accommodate? And so there is a little bit of tension between, cities' needs and our ability to kind of offer this in a wide scale. But this program specifically seems to really kind of like fit that niche, and which has allowed us to scale it as quickly. Really in terms of like the barriers we face, I think that, and, just sort of like lessons that we've learned, I think that one of the things that we really focus on is like kind of the quality matters. We spend a lot of time digging around tree roots, digging around, parts of the landscape that the sod cutter doesn't quite fit. And I think that, by kind of being really methodical and careful with how we work has really, I think I was thinking when I was kind of preparing this, like how many complaints or like callbacks we get. And it's like 1 or 2 a year, and we're doing hundreds of these projects. So, we're really taking our time and doing it right the first time so that we don't have a lot of like need to go back, and then also that really, people are really happy with the service, so they tell their neighbors. And we do see a lot of word of mouth, both with just our crews being there. I think, at the conference last week that I saw Lindsay at, she was like, yeah, I saw like your crew on my street. And, so we hear that all the time, where it's like, people see it happening and they call or they get involved. And so there's definitely like, like a social marketing influence there. But that's only going to work if the product is really high quality. So to us, like that's really important. And, and the other thing, and I mentioned this a little bit, is, just really balancing this need for like, verification or red tape, adding restrictions, adding rules, adding steps to our process, which we're working with local governments or, the state. And so sometimes, we tend to be the ones that are like, we can't add those steps, or we're sort of holding the line of keeping it really easy for residents because, for us, like that is, just like the Resource Central ethos is this idea of like, we want to make conservation so easy. People don't realize they're doing it. People want a beautiful yard or they want curb appeal. And so they're tackling these projects. And oh, by the way, they happen to be saving water. And so, we are really cognizant of how easy or what the perception of the process of participating with us is, because our goal is, to go beyond the early adopters and not, get people who are like gung-ho water conservationists, but people who are like, oh, my neighbor has a beautiful yard and look at all these bees and butterflies and I want to do that too. And people really, that aren't like, I'm going to do anything to get, an electric car, I'll jump through any hoop. But, it's really the people that are like, I'll do it, but only if it's relatively easy and relatively inexpensive. So the other thing is disposal. And we compost the sod, we take it away and compost it. For those of you who are based on in the Denver metro area, we work with A1 Organics. And so, they are the ones that were sort of at the center of the compost woes earlier this year, where, they had to really roll back a lot of things that they're accepting. And so they've had a tough year, and getting bandwidth with them, just even having a conversation has been tough. And, so we're finally in the process of really kind of figuring out how we can expand our partnership with them. But, it's just been a lot of, we'll show up to compost the sod and they're no longer accepting sod, or certain locations aren't accepting sod. And it's complicated because sod is really heavy. And so they have to wait for it to dry out before they can kind of, dump it in with the rest of their compost. So we're looking at things like kind of like intermediary stations where we can dump the sod and start the drying out process. And then, their big thing is like no empty trucks. So if they're, delivering compost to Boulder and they're coming back on 36, they could stop by, that site and pick up sod. So, we're kind of looking at different creative ways, but honestly, composting sod is a huge barrier for us. It's something, sometimes we have to drive really far with like a trailer full of sod. And so it can get, kind of complicated, but we're working on it. And, I would say, we have just gotten like a crash course in logistics. For us, this was like a totally new thing. At the height of this summer, we had 4 crews with, trucks and trailers out. They're removing, anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 square feet of sod a day, 5 days a week. And so, really, we've just had to like learn the hard way, of how to like kind of manage like logistics around that. And then, staffing has not been easy either. It's a interesting climate for hiring. And, this year we have a crew of 25 people. That's a lot of people to hire. So, we've really had to get creative about going to job fairs, and we're really sort of positioning this position, the position as like getting boots on the ground environmental experience, and that then, they can go and apply that later on. So we end up with a lot of college students, and which is a great pool of people for us to work with, but also, their availability is very specific. And so we kind of are having to structure our program around when college students are available, because that's really been the most successful kind of like hiring pool for us. And then the last thing I'll just mention is plant availability. Because our program is wrapped into our Garden in a Box program, we're limited with the number of plants that we can get in a year. So this year, this is our second, we've worked with, one primary nursery for 20 years. And we've been on the hunt for the last few years for a new nursery. We finally found one that is working out relatively well. This is our second year of working with them. We were able to grow the garden in a box stock this year by 40%, and it's still sold out in 4 weeks. So like we're just kind of like, and because our lawn removal program also offers it, there's definitely, a balancing and a sharing of resources that we're having to experience about wanting to get garden in a box customers the plants that they want, and garden in a box, cities that participate, the products and, discounts that they want, while also continuing to really ramp up this other portion of our operations. So it's, we're getting there, and we're definitely growing, but honestly, demand is just growing like at the same rate or higher than we can. And then, the last thing, sorry, I know I said the last thing was the last thing, but just one more thing that we're kind of grappling with right now is how we can support municipalities that are farther away. Last week we had a conversation with Cortez, which is 7 hours from our office, and so it's like, what does that look like? Like, how can we support communities that we can't just easily drive our truck and our trailer and our sod cutter to a community? And so really looking at different consultation services. Can we franchise our model? Can we do train the trainer events? And really, we're hoping over the next year or so to really kind of dig into that a little bit more. And just, we've obviously, like, we're doing it. We've figured out how to make it work. How can we share that with communities that it's not immediately a shoo-in that they could just contract with us? All right, now I'm done.
Right, so we're gonna get started. We're 30 minutes off, so I'm assuming you won't finish, but maybe work magic. So we'll adjust the afternoon, just knowing that we'll go to lunch at 12:30, so you've got an hour and a half. I am going to tell you your breakouts, the online team. You guys kind of know who you are because you can see each other. Let me get these. I can't see it. I don't have these on. So, Team A, and you can pick more creative names with Jenna and Elizabeth on this side. And if the noise ends up, like there's AC coming on and off, like I know it's for here. If you feel like once you start discussing and it's too loud, we can put you in the, like out there. I don't think you want to be outside because it's windy. Well, we can show you county. Or we can maybe create some space in this corner. So just let me know if it doesn't work, that you guys are separated that far. I know here might be a little excessive. So Team A, Rick, Lindsay, Drew, Patrick, Lisa, Andrea. That's your table. Got it? Team B, Tim, Frank, Val, Amy. There you are. There you are. And Paige on this table. And let me explain what is on the tables, and then you guys can just get to work. And hopefully that was good insight for everyone, and you're thinking about a lot. Sorry. Can you do TV? I'm sorry. So there are team instructions right here. For those of you visitors, I love you boys. For the 5-minute brainstorm that you start each question, because not everyone has had time to rethink this. These are post-it notes for your individual thoughts. And so 5 minutes, just quick brainstorm, maybe you need a little less time. Take these, I have set up flip charts for every question. So there's a flip chart. That's how I do these. Like be my other arms for a minute. I don't do this. And you'll just kind of proceed through these, rip them off, stick them somewhere on the wall, but you will flip through these. This is the individual, once you're done. Round the room, you would start and say, okay, so here were my, ideas. So those will all go on this. The recorder does not need to write them on this. I will just keep it as a record, but do explain your answers to each other. For your second question, We rip it off, stick it on the wall. Second question is, as a group, how do we want to collate our ideas? This is your big for discussion. So quick, rapid sharing, and then discuss. This will come back as a set of group recommendations that you agree on. There are major things that you do not agree on. Keep those in a note because you want to know that afterwards. Like if there's like something that you're all like, no, we don't agree at all on this topic, this might be something you need to dive into more. So group recommendations, when you come back to present, that's what you'll hear. And then if there are specific, hey, Russ could really help us by doing this, that's where you're gonna capture those ideas. Because they do have a role as the state funder in a lot of this, so how is it that they can use the resources most effectively? So you have that for each question. Is that clear? Okay. Yes, questions? All right. Thank you. All right, get to work, people. And you may drag a chair if that will help, since there's not chairs around. Unless you want to stand for a while, which you can also do.
So are us virtual people supposed to be meeting now?
I think so, although I think we're dropping here. Like some members. But who's actively on right now?
This is John McMahon. I'm on here for a moment, but honestly, I've been back and forth between a number of meetings and we'll
Okay.
do it.
It's been a little hard to hear
monitor
too.
And from the lands, and thank you. I think everything that you said was spot on, and I appreciate the list that was put together. From our standpoint is really trying to help support many of these ideas from the landscape side of things, but clearly you guys are the subject matter experts that can really put a lot of teeth and knowledge into the subject. I will say that, I know when I talk to like Frank Kinder and stuff, we've been saying for the last couple of years, trying to build a movement behind the idea of what Colorado scapes are and trying to bring attention to, what the problem is, why we're trying to make these efforts is part of the equation for us. I know when our companies go in there, the first target they have are those companies that are like a Centera or somebody that's making that kind of their brand. That's how they market their properties or HOA. And we've been playing off of that and putting them into what's currently called sustainable landscape management, because installation is really important, but the bigger piece is right now just managing what's already in place, because that's the bigger opportunity immediately. We'll do installation, but from our perspective, when it comes out, all this information, we'll probably redesign some of our certifications kind of based on the outcome. So, water budgets is one thing in irrigation, and then trying to show the landscape companies best practices to be able to achieve that. That's the other piece of it.
Everyone has access to the Word doc or the Google doc that Russ shared, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can put in some of the things I just said into here, but it's not, it seems like there's a lot of good things covered already as well. Sorry, I'm just not very good at typing and listening at the same time. So I haven't added anything in there yet, but it seems like we already have a pretty good jumping off point.
Yeah, I think that Marielle and Craig, you guys have done an excellent job putting in a lot of information here.
Well, this sounds great when we're talking to each other. I don't know if you guys, I had to like really focus to hear what was being said.
It was
Did
tough.
you guys?
Yeah,
feel the
no,
same way?
I had
Okay.
a hard time. It was nice when you came on because I could hear you really well.
Yeah, I'm like, I was getting like 50% of what was being said and kind of like trying to fill in the gaps.
Yeah, felt like an English language learner.
Yeah.
But I got the gist, I think.
Okay.
So was our job to just fill in this sheet here?
Yeah, it sounds like a few minutes to brainstorm on our own, which would be filling in that first section, and then I guess working with this group to come up with some collaborative group recommendations. And then the step beyond that would be, what could CWCB do to accelerate some of those recommendations? So whenever, maybe we take a couple more minutes and folks can review what's here and add anything additional they might have. And then we could talk about them as a group and maybe come up with some group recommendations.
Yep.
Yeah, that sounds great. And maybe we can, as we're reading through, like, the stuff that other people put on, I'm just wondering if there's like a way that we can kind of like, maybe just put like a +1 or +2 or something like, like, because I just like a lot of these, there's like a lot of stuff that's covered, and and so that maybe we can just kind of like coalesce around some ideas.
Yeah. Do you want to put the number at the beginning? That way it's a little easier to see kind of the frequency that others are agreeing with these comments.
Okay. Good. All right. Well, so we can just maybe take a few minutes to study independently and then come back.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Oh, well, I'm sorry, are we tagging things with agreement, or how are we doing that?
Do you want to like just put like a number, like 1, 2, so if you're the second person to like it, you could put 2, or do we just put like our initials on it, or what do you think is easier?
Sure. There's got to be some Google function for this.
I mean, you can add reactions, right? Like to things. So maybe just put like a thumbs up, like near the, and
there's emojis. Why don't we just a happy face for each like, sad face for each don't like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
And I guess I'm still writing mine, so I'm still adding stuff.
Oops.
Thanks everybody for running with things. This leaf blower is really it's brutal in the background.
Total silence in here.
We're busy.
Yeah, you guys are doing great.
Yeah.
Typing away. Is it really windy there?
No, it's really nice. We're just getting a little bit of cloud cover coming in right now, which is nice because it was starting to warm up. But I think it's just an awesome day in Salida. I wish you guys were here.
Yeah, ironically, I was just there last weekend.
Oh, nice.
But unfortunately, I've got a ton going on here right now, so I couldn't be there and be more engaged than I am right this moment. But I've been trying to monitor this, Russ, and I think you have a really good group of subject matter experts. We're here to help contribute and support the initiatives that are coming out of here.
Thanks. Yeah, no worries. I totally get it. We'll just try to move this around the state so we can get to a few more places and get to meet in person. But I think having a hybrid option is super convenient because life happens as well.
So yeah, I'll be dropping in and out all throughout the day, but certainly trying to see where you guys are heading.
Are you guys at a point where you want to start talking about these, or are you still adding ones?
I'm done. I've just been reviewing what folks have been writing. It looks like there's maybe one more person still writing, but otherwise it's slowed down a bit. But we're almost at 2 pages, so it's pretty good.
So I'm just kind of like scrolling through and seeing which ones have kind of more than one and it looks so like right at the beginning we have like this idea of kind of post-establishment education and really like I think this sort of gets at this idea of like how do we actually save water doing this, versus just it being more of like a theoretical thing. And so I think we're all kind of in agreement that that sort of happens in the maintenance phase. And and so, and I think that again, we work primarily right now with residential, and when we ask people how they water, it's actually really interesting. It's sort of like a split between drip watering and hand watering. And I actually am like I kind of like it when people hand water. I mean, it's a pain for them, but like, it just really like, I feel like most people don't overwater with hand watering. And so, but I do think that like for the long-term health of that landscape, like if you move into a new home and you have all this landscape that needs to be hand watered, it's like, oh, but I do think, I think it also ties into like educating people on drip systems, because I think that, we run a sprinkler inspection program too. And, people are mystified by their existing sprinkler system, and then trying to, doing a DIY conversion to drip is like really challenging too. I think there's a lot of good tools out there, but I feel like as a community, we need to do better, with like educating around drip systems. And I don't know, John, I'd be kind of curious from your perspective of like, from a green industry, like what is it like maintaining drip systems? Like, is it more challenging than underground? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it has been, but I mean, certainly our guys have been doing quite a bit of drip and finding ways of trying to reduce water usage. You know, and so much of it is just a little bit of resistance of people trying to put that type of upfront cost into things. And so what we've been doing is trying to show the studies, if they take these sustainable measures that we're talking about, the upfront cost actually pans out within a couple of years, and where they're actually getting cost savings and water savings and reducing plant attrition. But a lot of the people we've been targeting have been communities that are becoming you know, like I think I mentioned Centerra is one of them, but in McWinney, the developers, but they've already made it part of the brand promise of their community. You know, Grant Ranch is probably the next one that's going to be, you know, part of a like sustainable movement. And so those have been our easiest targets to have those conversations and putting those costs up front.
Yeah, so you know, and like we hear all the time also, I think people have a harder time, you know, it's like, I mean, granted, a lot of people don't water their grass like very efficiently, but you know, it's this sort of like people kind of understand like, okay, I water it like 2 days a week or 3 days a week. And I feel like there's sort of this shared understanding around it. But with drip, I mean, and it's really hard also to give, you know, it's like in general, you're like, okay, you know, on average, a spray head puts out this much water and a rotor head puts out this much water. So you can kind of give like, you know, ballpark like numbers of how long to water. But with drip, it's like, I have no idea if you have, you know, a 1 gallon an hour emitter or a 5 gallon an hour emitter. And most people don't know that either. And it's not labeled. And so I think that that's another thing that we really run into, where it's like, you know, it's almost impossible, you know, for like cities put out these little like, here's how many days a week to water or whatever. It's really difficult to do that with a drip system because there's so much more unknown around it. And it's not even like you can do a catch can test, you know, to like figure it out. So I do think that, you know, this is just something like as a community, you know, we just need to figure out how to help people understand like how much their system is putting out and how much they need to water. The best thing that we tell people, you know, it's like we just tell people to go out there and put your finger in the soil. But you know, a lot of people don't like to hear that. Like they're like, I want like a number. They don't want to be out there every day like sticking their finger in the soil.
Yep.
I don't have a good answer for that, but it's just something that we like, you know, field questions about all the time, and there's just not a good, you know, not a good recommendation. And I think the other thing that we struggle with is maintaining drip systems. It's like, you know, how to like, we try to teach people like how to spot leaks in your drip system, or, you know, things like that, like those little emitters pop off all the time. And so, you know, really like providing education around like, you know, just like we tell people like turn on your sprinklers and do like a walkthrough every year. It's like turn on your drip system and like these are the things to look for. But I feel like, you know, we just kind of need to like shift. And I know Resource Central hasn't done it as much, you know, of like shifting, you know, we're very much focused on like maintenance of underground sprinkler systems. And I think we just need to build out more resources for maintenance of drip systems. But
and with that, for those communities that have AMI, you know, we've got tools where customers could look at their hourly AMI and compare different days that they're using their drip to determine if there was a leak, right? So there's technology built into some of the AMI software that can help people identify that, but there's the need for education around how to help them better use that technology and that information to identify issues, and for staff to refine our methods so we can notify them if there's something that we're seeing on our end. We've made a little bit of progress in those areas, but it's definitely still, yeah, a big need there. I think we've come a long way, and getting people to understand how much water their grass needs, and that's a pretty uniform species, right? And so when you've got sometimes not even all the right hydrozone, not all the right plants in the same hydrozone, that becomes really challenging.
Let's see here. So what's the next one? And this one, I mean, like for me and at Resource Central, like, I mean, this is huge. I mean, people like, we ask everyone, like, why did you participate in our program? And not a single, like, like every year, to make their yard more attractive is the number one reason why people participate in our program. And we've seen like pollinator habitat, like, in the last like 10 years, I've seen it going from like number 7 on the list to like in the top 3. So like, this is huge. And I feel like, sometimes like as water practitioners, or it's like really easy to get focused on water, but I agree. I mean, it's like, people, it's like you could save, I don't know, like $100 a year or like 200, that's not like the most compelling. They're like, well, I'm spending like $500 or $1,000 on this project or way more. But I think, like, to me, it's like, I just think about like this paradigm shift of like what neighborhoods look like. And if you can change what neighborhoods look like, then you change what people want to see on public spaces. And, and it starts like hyper locally of like what they expect when they're driving down their street, or like, pulling up to a house that they think is beautiful or has beautiful landscaping. And so to me, I think, that's like a great perk of, there's some things like solar panels that you're never going to be like, it's beautiful. Like, don't you want to like see these on your roof? Like, this is like, we're really lucky that we're sort of like selling something that has like this really like wonderful additional benefits that we can focus on. And the water savings happens, but it's just not like the primary driver.
Yeah, my feeling on this is, I mean, this is why a lot of turf replacement programs now are focusing on commercial, institutional, and industrial, because residential is so hard for this reason. And the financial, I think, incentives are a lot more realistic, real or visible for, a large institutional landowner that has acres and acres of land and has, tens of thousands of dollars in water bills. That's why I think it's really good to start with CII. And I think, and then work your way into like HOAs, which also have large acreages, but individual, I personally just think turf replacement for personal residential is going to be, it's going to be very incremental and slow for that reason. Just because the preferences are so strong in that area.
And I do, I have seen a lot more utilities looking at like turf removal or like turf removal incentives for, like, I think as water gets more expensive, more it's like becomes part of like water bill assistance programs or things like that. Like, we've seen that like in lots and lots of communities where it's like, and it's an open question whether or not it's like a real thing or it's optics, which is a hard thing to kind of tease out. It's like if you could, but at the same time, it's like, okay, we're increasing your water bill, but we're going to give you an option for changing your landscape so that you don't have to spend as much water in the summer, to keep it looking good. And so I think that there is like an interesting kind of like equity piece here or an opportunity to combine like, as things get more expensive, you can reduce your costs by, changing your landscape. And we've just seen more utilities looking at that. I think we have like almost 5 utilities who are like heavily incentivizing either garden in a box or the lawn replacement program, for people that are in bill assistance programs. Does Fort Collins have bill, like, do you guys do anything with landscaping with your bill assistance program participants?
We have talked about doing more with our Xeriscape incentive program, which would be our landscape transformation program, like a sliding scale. But right now, all we offer is, as you know, we partner with you all on Garden in a Box, and we have a higher rebate amount for our income qualified assistance program, which is our bill assistance program for Garden in a Box, than we do for our non income qualified group.
But nothing with like your like turf removal like program.
Nothing with our turf
okay.
removal program right now. We've talked about a sliding scale, so offering some things, the same kind of model that we're doing with Garden in a Box with our turf removal or landscape transformation program, but not currently.
Yeah, that'd be interesting for someone to tackle. Yeah, I haven't heard of. I mean, I'd be curious if like Aurora or Castle Rock or anyone else is doing that, but yeah, and you know, I think like in a few weeks we're meeting with the city of Lafayette because they're like getting a lot of pushback on their you know, future increases, and they're trying to figure out, you know, how to like support people through it. So but anyway, let's see, native grass. I think obviously, you know, and I agree with all of these things that, you know, like I do like on a large scale. I mean, that's like really just the right thing to do. Like would be impossible to put, you know, like perennial xeric landscape like on like 5 acres. That would just be like a maintenance nightmare. I did put, and this is, I think people that talk to me a lot probably have heard this a lot before, but you know, just like really looking at, I mean, it's something that Resource Central is looking at because we haven't really found a good alternative. But you know, for us, like either non-chemical methods or you know, just more like kind of keeping an eye on this like public health and environmental issue of you know, chemically killing the lawn is, I just wanted to note that because that's something that, and you know, I would love you know, lots of people looking at that because I do think that you know, that's just something that is a concern for us.
As someone who has native grasses, one of the things, there are some misconceptions. A lot of people think they don't need any water or any irrigation. And so I've seen a lot of dead fescue and grandma. And so it's really hard to get the right amount of irrigation. People like they often don't water them at all, or they over irrigate them almost as much as turf. So it's like, that's a really tough one to get the irrigation right for those ones.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to the like maintenance, you know, maintenance thing of like building that into, you know, just more education around it. But I think there's a lot of great work being done, you know, in this space with the training next month and but you know, to me, like I think one of the things that we're grappling with is like there's the actual work, you know, how to do it, but then there's how to get communities or businesses to the point of like actually wanting to do it. You know, I think that there's like we hear from like one you know, community a week where that's like, hey, we like, what can you offer me by way of you know, to remove our lawn, and then they honestly, I think the price ends up like, you know, kind of scaring a lot of people off, or it's just, you know, it's like, well, we're not gonna, it's not free, you know, and communities can't, I mean, spend like $50,000 or $100,000. I mean, I guess they could, but right now they just don't have the budget earmarked for that, like per property, to incentivize it in a meaningful way. And so, you know, I don't know what the answer is, but I think that there's like it's just even getting them from like, yeah, this might be cool, or like, oh, we've been discussing it, to like, okay, we're ready to go. I think there's just like a chasm there, where there's like remote or just sort of like mild interest. But there's not a lot of like, of people who are actually navigating it, you know, to make like a meaningful change. And, you know, I would like that, and I think we just need more like stories, like, you know, really like documenting people who do it and how they do it and how they pay for it. Because what I've seen is that you basically need like a super champion in that community, to actually get it done, like a homeowner or someone, you know, like a Don Ireland type who's just like gung-ho, like super passionate about it. And if you don't have that, then there's just like all of these roadblocks that you know, people kind of just get like disenfranchised, like, you know, through the process, and it just never ends up like actually happening.
Kate, just for Kate and all, just for time, I've been trying to kind of track the main themes that you said and copy down in the group recommendations, the things that got the most votes or seem to have extra kind of smiley faces beside them, and maybe some key themes and additions that you guys have had in your conversation. But I don't know who wants to volunteer to report out, but make sure you're tracking that that summary. It's a little messy. Makes sense to you.
Russ, can you remind us how much time we should be spending on, like, are we going back after just this one discussion, or are we supposed to be talking about all of these?
I was told 5, 5, 5. So 5 for our personal, which was nice. We got a jump start, and then 5 for the group conversation. And then what is our last? It's I guess the component we haven't really talked about. And I personally would, Marja put in CWCB, but I wonder if it's just more broadly the state, because some of this isn't going to be us at all, but is there a state role to support collaboration? Our lens would probably be largely limited to, I mean, I suppose some policy, but largely funding.
And I guess I'm curious about how much are we meant to be talking here about the choice of what is essential turf or non-essential? Is that part of our directive?
I think so. I actually copied down what you said. I really like that. Is this about just defining what's non-essential, or is it about preservation and what's essential? I think that's kind of a neat way of thinking about it, and honestly might be easier for some people to wrap their head around.
Because I think, I mean, that's like, but I feel like almost before we get into the details of like how you convert turf, like this question of like how we even decide what's essential and non-essential is so important. I don't think that's at all settled. Like you look at what's in the state bill, it's very limited and vague, right? And leaves a lot of room for people to, you know, individual municipalities to make up their own minds. So.
Well, and Austin, I think, I mean, tell me if you think this is wrong, but I actually really liked your other comment too, because I was noting, and then I saw that you had written something about it, but it seems like this morning we teed up some conversation, and Kate, I know you spoke to it as well about, and I know Denver Water's like in this of like maybe just trying to focus on bigger properties or economy, you know, where you're going to get economies of scale and not necessarily single family. But it seemed like we didn't talk about that as much early on, but then you kind of brought that back, which I think is right. If you're focused on, you know, municipal properties first, you have the benefit of kind of some runtime to decide what you do want to keep and what you want to experiment with taking out. And you can take those lessons learned into a commercial property, and you're going to have a bigger area to really test that. And then that might help you refine that at the single family level. But it does seem to me the savings are hard. The savings are harder, and Kate, totally get what you're saying too. I mean, I think we're all trying to look for equity opportunities, but I mean, I think it still holds that whatever you're doing for bill assistance probably has the net sum game of not much water saved, which is ultimately what you're trying to do. So like the delta between those two spectrums seem really important to this discussion as well. And you'll just have more room to run for experimentation if you're looking at municipal properties first.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of how I feel. I feel like this is going to be, this is new, everything's new. And it makes sense. It's going to start with the things where you can get the most mathematical change with the least amount of effort. And then slowly we're going to run out of those opportunities and we're going to be going to the ones that are more incremental and like individual property, residential ones is the toughest one. But, I mean, we can get the biggest change in the long term, but they're not big incremental changes the way like changing a massive institutional or park property or whatever would be.
And like in my mind, like a lot of this is cultural, like, and it's tied to like a perception of
from desktop 3U4
like, like a perception of like wealth, and I don't know how, like it's this like mind shift of, like I think like a lot of, business parks or things like that, like yes, they're putting in grass because it is easy to maintain, but I don't think that's the only reason, or if you look at like, high-end homeowners associations or things like that, they're putting it in because there's this perception of like, of wealth and like what looks nice and what, and so, and I think that, I don't know the answer to like figuring that out of like, how do you get landscapes that the installers or the owners of these businesses feel like it reflects that same thing. I always think about like Boulder. And, if you drive through like the Chautauqua neighborhood, it is like a plethora of xeric landscapes, and it's gorgeous. Like all of them are just like, I mean, there's not a lot of, like, traditional lawn landscapes but they're just these like really beautiful landscapes and that community has like made that shift to like, this is what it means to like live in this really nice house. Now, if you go to, and I don't want to pick on Highlands Ranch, but if you go to Highlands Ranch and you go through these neighborhoods, it's a totally like what it means to have a nice home and take good care of your things. It looks really different. And I don't know how to navigate that. But I think that like, if we're going after these business parks, like you look at like Interlochen, like again, it's not just like it's easy to put it in. It's also they're selling the idea of what these businesses are and having these expansive lawns as part of that.
I mean, I also think that it's just a little bit of the default right now. Like that's just what you do. You don't have to think about it. So Kate, I'm with you. I think what we're coming to a quick conclusion that it is far too expensive for us to help people, convert square foot by square foot, because we're not going to spend $800 million like Las Vegas did. So what we really have to do is inspire that cultural change and show people, this is the right landscape for Colorado. It's going to take a lot longer, for sure, but I think that's what we're intending to do. And I think the properties that we do convert are really meant to foster that cultural change, whether it's demonstration or just say, this is happening. We hope you like it, or we want to understand what you like and what meets your needs. So I'm just chiming in on a couple of thoughts that you guys have shared. Very much believe in that community engagement, because I think it will be different community by community, and really trying to get those influencers within the community to change that. So we're looking at community programs in the future. The city of Denver has a few community engagement programs that we want to attach to. So yeah, I think that's good. Austin, I don't know if you were talking about specifically about question 3, which is would Colorado benefit from a revised definition of what is meant by non-essential? I may be on the further end of the spectrum. I do think it may change from community to community. I think about what Aurora's done, which is they're not going to allow front yards, I believe, with turf. I don't think we're there in Denver necessarily. So I think I think we really should leave some flexibility in how we're defining non-essential. Having said that, I also wonder whether there is at least a few things we can all agree, like medians, like it's more places that shouldn't have turf. So just a couple of thoughts.
Totally. I think like that's what the state bill did, is it found the most obvious categories, the ones that like everyone I think can agree on. And those are the ones where, like we can literally identify every grassy median in the state and just go after them. And not very many people are going to care. Right. So it's like relatively little pain for a lot of benefit. And it's just one category, And then, but the question is, then when we run out of those easy categories, then what do we do? And obviously we're talking about cultural shifts, and that's what we need for residential, right? So that's a long term. Mediums, we could probably do those. That's just how quickly we can get shovels on the ground, right? Residential is how long does it take us to change minds? Totally different, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, go ahead.
Sorry, Greg, and I wanted to chime in on two things here. Now that every leaf in Salida has been blown away, thank goodness, because that went on for a good half hour. When I think about this cultural shift, Greg, I'm curious to like something we talked a lot about in our first meeting that I don't think came up here much yet, though. I do wonder about what kind of incentives we're going to need to get the right plant material, because there's the whole commercial side. But if I just think about going to a big box store on the weekend, like it's mostly not the stuff we want going in.
Yeah.
So are there any, and just in thinking about that piece of it, is there anything that you see a role for the state? Like, is there some kind of incentive that could be given to, I feel like the way that, in Denver Water helped spearhead some of that change around EPA water sense legislation, but are there things like that could work to make those kind of market shifts?
Kate should weigh in on this because I think she knows it way better than anybody else. But I do think if we create that demand, that the supply is going to follow. Maybe that's naive in thinking, but I think there are going to be some lean years for the first few years as we really settle out, like what is the demand, and are we all speaking in a common voice in terms of the plant material? I think that's really important to sort of guide where the market will go in terms of the right plants. So I think you ask a great question. We have talked, not in serious terms yet, but like, should we use some of our land to open greenhouses to plant some of those plants? Because we have a lot of land. I think that market, I don't know, I'd be interested to hear what Kate has to say in terms of that market and growing it.
So, I mean, we've seen a lot of growth. I mean, so, when I started in this job, I mean, like we would sell 800 Gardenetta boxes a year, and now we're at 10,000 Gardenetta boxes like this year. That, our program and through the support of, the people that buy them and the cities that support the program have basically like pushed that growth. I mean, and that's, and I do think, given how quickly our products sell out, like there's people then who are going, to nurseries. I think it's really complicated. Where I see like a regulatory need is around what those plants are treated with, because I mean, I have I have an issue, with like Home Depot and Walmart and all these places selling plants that have been treated with neonics. And that's something that, we took a hard stand on because we had to, and so all of our plants, and Boulder and other communities have done a great job of supporting local nurseries and making lists of local nurseries that are neonic free. But like, to me, it's like that is, if we put in like, acres of landscaping that has been treated with neonics, like that's a huge issue, for our pollinator population. And that's we talk about unintended consequences, like that's one right there. And so I think that there are things like that are needed. I do think like what's going to get Home Depot to sell more like native plants. I mean, yeah, I think people coming, not buying peonies at at Home Depot, because we shouldn't have those like in our yards. I mean, that's a huge driver. But I also think that this is a great opportunity for all of us to there are some really amazing local nurseries in pretty much every single community. And those are the nurseries that are coming out saying, we're not treating our plants with neonics. Like they're selling native plants, like all of those things. And so I feel like we just need to do a good job of like propping up those resources that are there. But it's a hard sell for someone. They're like, I can get 4 plants for $12 at Home Depot, and they come in these gallon pots of, oh, look, they're blooming. Versus like, the communication we have with our customers, they're in 4-inch pots and they're not blooming, and trust us, they're going to get big, next year or whatever. Like that's a hard sell. But I think that.
But could there be an
go ahead.
incentive? I guess I'm just curious, Kate, sorry to interrupt, but because you make a good point. And I mean, I think whether it's Roundup or neonics on plants, like, I guess I'm just wondering if there's, for example, if legislation was created that would even provide a tax incentive to, and doesn't have to be just big box stores, but big box stores and nurseries. It just strikes me that creating a cultural shift is fine, but what we hear a lot of is people can't get the plants that they want. So if they're going to go buy something, I think they generally will default, well, hey, these peonies are here, so I'm going to grab that, right? So it's if we could we say, if you're, getting plants that are, grown in an appropriate way and that are native to Colorado, you're getting some kind of incentive. Would that kind of thing help foment a market transition, do you think? Or in your experience, that is like a discount's not going to help?
I mean, I'm curious about this idea that people say they can't get plants that they want, because like within 10 miles of my house, and granted I'm living in Boulder County, so maybe I'm not a good example, but I know that there's lots of local nurseries that sell that are stocked with these kinds of plants. Even Garden in a Box, it's like, okay, we sell out in 4 weeks, but they're on sale right now, and people can buy them, and they're going to be on sale for the next few weeks, and we're really ramping up our fall stuff. So to me, it's like when I hear that, it's like, okay, well, where are you looking? If you're looking at Home Depot or like a big box store, like, yes, you're probably not going to find it, but I think we just need to, a lot of people don't know that there's local nurseries that are available to them. Like all they see is going to a big box store. And so maybe we just need to educate more. I don't know, like I just struggle with like, that just feels hard to understand. Like, for someone who is just like, where can I go to get my plants this year?
Let me ask it a different way. Would another thing that's brought up, or I've seen other states do, is have just a plant list that they push and then you can't buy anything else? Is that a solution, at least to make sure that the right plants are there?
So when you say that, I'm like, ooh, are all of our plants on there? And like, would we have to change, like the ones? So I think I would love to solve this without regulation, and really do a better job of education. But I don't know the answer. I mean, I think that we're hit up all the time. It's like Plant Select's like, why aren't you selling just Plant Select plants in the garden? And then the native plant people are coming and saying like, why are all your gardens not 100% native? And, then we have somebody else, saying, this. So I do struggle with like coming up with a one size fits all solution. Is it like, because if you come out with a plant list that's not 100% native, like there's a lot of people who are like uber passionate about like we should only be planting native plants. And then, Plant Select has, is a really important organization, statewide, and they're doing a ton of great work. And so, how many Plant Select plants are you going to put on there? But then Plant Select plants are by nature more expensive. And so I just think it ends up being really complicated. I'm not saying we shouldn't go down that road, but I do feel like I don't know how much effort we've put in as a community to solve it in the first place. I think there's still a lot more that we could do. I don't know if other people have thoughts on that.
Kate, I'm with you. I don't think I wouldn't support putting out a state plant list like this is the only thing you can pick from. But I think you highlight another issue, which is you just mentioned, I think, 3 different types of plant lists. I think from a consumer standpoint, it's like, oh my God, where do I even start? I think there's a huge need for some amount of education, and whether or not you get like a comprehensive plant list, I think a lot of people really need some guidance, not only selecting plants, but also that step-by-step process in terms of like how to get rid of your line in an environmentally friendly way, how to treat your plants, etc. Russ, I don't know, if the state wants to dive in on that sort of guidance, but I will tell you from Denver Water's standpoint, this is absolutely fundamental to a program we will build, which is this step-by-step process, including a list of plants. Maybe it's huge, maybe it's this huge list of plants, but we know that these are sort of some of the big barriers when people go try to redo their lawns. Money's a separate issue, but I think just the know-how and where to begin is a big barrier that we need to solve.
Oh, good. Somebody else wants to say something. I wonder if we have a second, I want to switch back to the, because I don't want to cut off that conversation either. There were 2 thoughts there. The second being this conversation around like median. So again, like thinking from, what other states have done, and this is where I think it would be really important for us at one of our missions on this task force is to help define what we think non-functional, non-essential turf is. But if Colorado went like California and they just put a ban out on it, that definition is super important. and I like, and I do wonder if, one thing we could say is we could define it, but we could say we don't necessarily think that's what's right for Colorado, but it might be more important to focus on the areas. And I guess, Austin, when you say like, well, what do you do after you? Because I think to me, your point's well taken. I do think we could knock off all the medians, but it might be underselling how hard that would be. Like some communities, we don't have a lot of money going to do this at all, are going to really struggle. And even for big communities, I mean, this is a new line item budget that would create a lot of work, but it does offer maybe higher opportunity to go down to potentially even zero water. I mean, you don't necessarily even have to put in xeriscape. You might actually just be able to put in like permeable pavers. I mean, there's a lot of questions and heat island concerns there, but it seems a good opportunity. If we burn through in a perfect world, every median in Colorado, it strikes me you could just have legislation to go after the next thing. Like I guess the question here is on both sides of that. Do we think, how would we feel about a state ban, I guess, if we went like a California way? And in lieu of that, would it be better to focus on certain areas and trying to kind of hone people in on where they could measurably make a difference?
Just a couple thoughts from my end. I think there are 2 routes there. The first one and for us is if we're I think we're all talking about making this big investment in changing the landscape. What we don't want to do is lose that investment by allowing turf grass to go in where we all agree it shouldn't. So to me, it's like the simplest step is don't allow it in the future. I think that's less costly even for the communities that don't have a lot of money to do a replacement program. I think we can talk about the second part of that, which Vegas did too, or Nevada did, which is like you have to take out all of your non-functional turf by 2025. But we would be strong supporters of any future bans on any future landscapes where it doesn't make sense. And again, it's for us, it's medians, tree lawns, and probably commercial park or commercial properties where it's obvious that it's just ornamental.
And Russ, like, so in states that have done this successfully, because I'm just thinking about like medians and like what does that mean for medians with trees on them? And should like, and because that's already like a pretty hostile environment for a tree to grow. And I know like there's just a lot of them around me, and would there be, so if you're going to like zero watering or something like that on a median, but do you know like what are there like exceptions for trees, or have you seen anything?
I don't know. I don't know if Austin or others.
Yeah, I don't think that's in the law. I think that's a flaw in the law. Because the irrigation needed to support the trees is probably going to be more than enough to support shaded turf. So you don't really gain anything by getting rid of that turf. But that's a point. That was actually a point I put in on my list there, was that we have to make sure that we do make a distinction between turf that is full sun and turf that is shaded. Shaded turf in Colorado. I've been working with Denver water data. Thank you, Greg. And it's incredible how much more people irrigate when there's full sun turf. It is a huge amount more for full sun turf versus shaded turf. And so the savings you're going to get by pulling out shaded turf is going to be much, much smaller. So, and
it's really hard to grow perennial plants in shade.
Yeah.
That's tough. That's a really hard environment. And so you end up, needing something different, but that's something that we struggle with, and there's just not a lot of, native plants that grow in shade. So you end up, with more adaptable plants, which isn't, the native community is harder sell, but.
One of the quickest ways we could get to water savings in shaded areas is getting people to actually measure their shade and reduce their irrigation in shaded areas, because almost everybody over irrigates in shaded areas. They don't need nearly as much water as they do. We could save a huge amount just by calibrating those numbers, but it's hard to do because it requires observation and data. But we could save a huge amount. So you definitely don't want to be ripping up turf in the heavily shaded areas. That would be a waste of effort.
But back to, I guess what Greg, I think that new develop, because I see it go in all the time. And there's a commercial new build kind of near me, and it's like they're just, they put in a ton of turf, and it's just like, ooh, like sucks, and it's not, it's like in these little triangles and like weird places that it shouldn't be, and so I think that but it's just hard, because I think statewide, and like what I think there's like some issues with like communities where they're like, well, we can support more ornamental turf, like we have the water resources to support more ornamental turf, and so we're not going after it as aggressively as some areas where it's like they have to take it out because they need it for their water portfolio in the future. So I do, this kind of idea of like there's not a one size fits all solution is challenging, because I feel like you're going to get pushback from communities that aren't, everyone's kind of in a different water situation, and so their needs are different.
And exactly, and this gets back to why it's so hard to craft these criteria in the law, right? you know, beyond something like medians, which most people can agree on. But even now we're saying, even within medians, you got to look at, you know, are there trees in the median or not, right? So this is why that is a very, very hard statewide law to craft. But really, we don't have a lot of good guidance for like, okay, well, if you have these conditions, you know, as a community, here is sort of a model code you could follow. We don't really have that yet, and that's what we need to develop. But I think it's easier to do that for big CII turf, right? It's easier to come up with criteria for you know, office parks and medians and things like that, and municipal parks. But that's with when you start getting residential, it's gonna be trickier, and that's where you're almost going to need like a set of templates, like a guidebook with different kind of typologies of local communities, and like they're each going to have a different, like a typology, like residential communities with mature tree canopy are going to have a completely different solution from brand new, you know, like E470 Aurora communities, right? There couldn't be more different, right? So just figuring out what those factors are, I think that differentiate one community from another is a great first step.
You know, Austin, I'm just thinking about your, you know, kind of thing of like, you could just save a lot by just getting people to change their watering under trees. And I do wonder if there's like an opportunity, you know, granted it's a longer payback, but like, well, you could remove your turf, or you could plant a tree in the middle of it, you know? And then in 10 years, you know, the water savings of those two things might be different, but then you get the added benefit of, you know, everything else a tree brings to your community.
Although you're watering that tree a lot in the interim to get it to canopy status, but yes.
Yeah, but you're watering your grass too, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
I think I struggle with, I mean, I think it seems like we have a common thought that trees are really good. I think it's, at least in a lot of situations, it seems like we have to figure out how to water trees without turf underneath it. I still believe, Austin, you can disagree with this, that there are areas like tree lawns where it is really difficult to water turf grass efficiently. You could still water a tree efficiently with a drip line, but watering turf grass on narrow strips of land and medians is difficult, if not impossible, to do efficiently. So I still question, you know, I think our perspective, and this may pick up on the comment you made, Kate. There are a lot of communities that may not need to do this, but I think a lot of what we've talked about is, given Colorado River situation, this is of statewide concern, regardless of your supply situation. Like, does Colorado need grass in these areas? I think the answer is no, regardless of, like, you know, if you have abundant supplies. I think, to me, it's we should really think about our climate and where grass should be, even if we're feeling like years like this where we have an abundant supply.
And that gets back to the question of, do you start with what's not essential, or do you start with what's essential? And if you start with what's only essential, then it, you know, you'll quickly find there's actually not really much turf we need. It's a very, very small amount. And then everything is, you know, 90% of the turf's on the table suddenly. It's very different from then if you just say what's non-essential, because it's very, very hard to you know, it's much more individual choices, right? And I feel like in the state we've taken more the approach of what's non-essential.
Right. I agree with that, Austin. I think that's a really good way to think about it. It's like, what are the essential uses? Because it's an important point to make, that landscapes are essential for livable, inviting cities for sure. And grass space is included in that. So yeah, I like that thought.
Yeah, I just getting back to I think the HOAs, I want to make sure those are not, overlooked, and they're written about several times in our comments. It just seems like if you look at all the new development, the vast majority, stop me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the vast majority of new development is HOA development. Like, it's just hard to find individual, like the proportion of development in Colorado that's going to be HOA is going to only grow with time. And right now, a lot of the non-HOA stuff tends to be in the older, more historic neighborhoods. And those also tend to be areas with more tree canopy. So I think putting a really like a big magnifying glass on HOAs and what they're doing is so important. And especially since so many HOAs are now really putting most of their focus on landscape, on common space, and not on individual yards. A lot of, like, you look at like Highlands Ranch, for instance, right? They're microscopic irrigated areas, right? They're microscopically small landscaped areas because as part of the deal of, like putting aside all that, whatever, 8,000 the Highlands Ranch open space, 8,000 acre open space, they basically got density bonuses on all so the lot coverage is huge. It's very, very small setbacks. So there's very, very little actual, like individually irrigated turf. It's mainly in the common areas. So, and I don't know, are the HOA managers talking to each other about like, what's the best practices here? Like, are they using the same landscaping companies or not? Are they like, is there any coordination going on with HOAs?
I don't know.
Same.
But I think that there are communities that are doing it right, but then there are still, we went to like a wedding in Keensburg, and I hadn't driven like through, like the Frederick, Firestone, like Dacono area, like in a really long time, and seeing all the development out there. And there's a lot of turf grass in those like new developments out there. And it's, first of all, I'm like, this is insane. It's like, if it's like barren landscape, and then there's these like little pockets of like bright green, yards and whatnot. And I think that, it does seem like the lot sizes are getting smaller, but it really depends on the developer themselves as to like what the community looks like. So I think it is challenging. But I agree. I mean, I think that it's like, why, let's stop putting it in, like, let's just draw the line there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Aurora, I think is a good, I think you're right. It varies by community, and a lot of it is governed by development codes. And Aurora is a good example where their new development ordinance, their landscaping ordinance, which went into place, 5 years ago, whatever, has really cut down on, private, landscaping space in favor of common area. You look at almost all those new developments in East Aurora, and they're mainly common open space, but tons of other jurisdictions don't have that at all. And so that's maybe something the state can address. Yeah,
because I think that like Aurora obviously has like the city is on board with water conservation, whereas I think that some of these like more northeastern like developments, there tends to be a less like conservation mindset sometimes, and then also the people that are moving into those neighborhoods potentially are less conservation minded. And so I do think there's just like a divide, like a political divide there, also about, you know, just like the importance of it. And you know, and that would be like hard to overcome. You know, you'd have to really work on like changing city councils or you know, and that's you know that's not something that I feel like a lot of people want to get involved with. So you know, the state coming in and doing that for everyone, I think would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Hey, can you say that last part again? Because I now have dueling leaf blowers, which is, I mean, really just phenomenal. But
I was just
about what the state could do.
Yeah, I was just saying that, you know, I think that like where some of the development is happening is in, you know, more rural or like more like conservative areas. And so, you know, getting landscape codes to change in those areas or, you know, getting like, you know, public support for that, sometimes, you know, might not be easy to do, you know, as like, you know, in comparison to more progressive areas. And so, you know, if you rely on community by community, you're going to see progressive areas, you know, or like having one set of codes and then, you know, other places having another set of codes. So, you know, to provide to statewide landscape ordinance or something like that would alleviate that need for like political change.
Yeah, it's tough in a home rule state, you know, but you know, I think, but particularly, I know that HOAs can be regulated in and many states do. And in fact, if you go to Arizona, like in Arizona, like pretty much every HOA property has xeriscaping. It's just the standard. I don't know if it's state regulation or if it's just that's the common practice with each. You know, that's not the case at all in Colorado. But
Awesome. Well, I have a lot of sprawling notes here, but I tried to just break out kind of just in where the state could be supportive. Like I think the big four themes are focus on HOA development and that being smarter, state support. I do think there's something there, Kate. I don't know what that looks like or who does that. I mean, it's certainly not us, but state support that could reduce chemical loading in any number of fashions, or at least are considering that with policy development. The guidebook kind of thing is definitely seems like more within our wheelhouse, because that's something that we could help, you know, fund or bring people together on. And then just the kind of general concept that the ban from any kind of ban, or however we want to phrase that, of preventing surf from going back in once you took it out, or just not putting it in the first place in certain areas, seems more favorable than other types of bans that might be thought about. We had a lot of good conversation underneath that about whether we're focusing on what we want to keep or what we want to go away, but thought that was kind of the overarching theme there.
Yeah.
Is there anything else in that list?
well, here's a recommendation for state legislation. I just thought of it. So, like, you know, given that it's very hard to, you know, in a state like Colorado to have a statewide land use regulation, it's a lot easier to have incentives, and a statewide incentive program that would be really interesting would be to basically all new HOA developments get a density bonus, essentially, if they provide common open space in exchange for smaller you know, setbacks on individual properties, if that common open space has a certain percentage with low water landscapes. And that's a win-win, because the developers get more density, which they like, and we have smaller individually irrigated areas on individual properties, which are harder to regulate in the first place. And you then you get a guarantee of low water landscapes for those larger common areas. That would be, a not particularly politically contentious one because it's incentive based.
Fair, yeah. I like that. And I'll throw this out here, but one of the missing elements I always feel like, and maybe it's this when we're with Val, but the stormwater components of this, I mean, in some places, when we're talking about densification, I feel like other cities have figured this out around more coming from a greening or store. And there's the flip side of drought, right? The flooding piece. But I mean, I think there's just some, as we're thinking about this, I often worry about if we're part of that definition of what's non-essential shouldn't come at the expense of reducing our water quality protections for stormwater runoff as well. So I think that needs to be filtered in here, but I think what you're talking about could do that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just got the 3-minute warning and I think we're gonna break for lunch. I think what might be good before you guys break, and maybe that would give us a good place to start back up, is if you wanna skip to that next question too. So how should we use land use water provider policy? How could that be aligned with turf replacement programs and investments? I think that this is really getting to, you know, what are the things that we can kind of stack that are going to add to a greater end benefit? Some of this you may have already covered above, and if that's the case, you could just copy it down again. Or if you have new thoughts, if you guys want to, I can kind of sign off now and let you get to that, and then we'll pick it back up there, and maybe we can do the same smiley face thing. We could even start with the smiley faces if you just want to get out some quick ideas here, and we'll come back with the group recommendation in an hour, 1:30.
So should we write stuff down here right now or on question 2?
I think that wouldn't be a bad idea, just to spend 5 minutes on, just to do that now while you're thinking about things. And that way, when we come back, it wouldn't be, we could spend the first 5 minutes when we get back, maybe, of doing that smiley face or what we liked. And I might be on a call, try to see if I can get done by then, but Elizabeth might be helping facilitate that. But you guys were doing fine without without me, so I don't think it's needed.
So Russ, we're on lunch until 1:30, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, and yeah, we can just write our thoughts down here.
Yep, yeah, that sounds good. Just write your thoughts, and then we'll spend the first 5 when we get back, kind of reading what everybody wrote and kind of seeing what we agree with or what has the most alignment, and kind of filter that into our group recommendations. And also, if there's anything, sorry, my answer is sprawling, but sometimes you guys were saying beautiful things I don't want to lose, so I'll try to summarize. But in our group recommendations, hopefully those kind of main themes and the bigger bullet headers are the right kind of things to pull out. And I don't know if one of you, whenever we do report out, want to think amongst yourselves of who would be willing to speak up and kind of give the report out, but I think it'd be good coming from one of you. All right, I'll break. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, Russ.
Thanks.
I'm gonna sign off briefly, but I'll write some answers in this section.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm guessing, so how are these supposed to be different from what we wrote above? This is really focused on policy, I guess, right? Is that the difference?
Yeah, I think we captured a lot up above, but maybe there are some new ones.
Do we want to have a group recommend? So I think we can write our individual responses. Do we want to write a group one, or should we wait until we've all written?
Well, I think we'll have, was I understand that right, that we'll have a chance at like 1:30 to talk about it as a group?
Okay.
Yeah, my guess is, like, I think Russ suggested we get on like 5 or 10 minutes early. Like if we can get on at 1:20, maybe we can come up with some group recommendations.
Yeah.
That sound good?
Yep.
1:20. Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
See you guys in a
See
little
you
bit.
soon.
Bye, folks.
came out. Communication and education. Almost everything we talked about could funnel up to good communication and good education. You know, we felt it's important to educate on the why. Why are we doing this? Why is this important? Almost kind of the biggest critical factor of that education. We talked about messaging being tailored to the constituents, right? Who is this messaging being directed at? It might be different for elected officials than versus homeowners, or then versus code enforcement officers, then versus municipal staffs. Might be different versus landfill contractors. So the messaging we thought was really important to tailor citizens. We also thought it was important to showcase success, right? People are visual, so if you can show what success looks like in the end, it might help change people's attitudes as we move through the process. We also thought that expectations and aspirations need to be flexible, and also, you know, just don't think minimally, I guess is what we thought there. So they need to be flexible, things change, learn together by doing. It's okay to fail. We talked about, because failure is a learning point, because if you fail, that means you tried. If you don't try, then you never got it in the first place. Be innovative in these programs. And then one of the challenges we thought is there's just the capacity challenge here is, you know, does the organization have the capacity? Does it have the resources? Does the community have the capacity? So again, I think the overarching goal, I think that we came away is education and communication are absolutely. And that group.
Okay. CWCB role, anything in that?
Sorry. We'll read from the table here. So CWCB role, we thought they could be the kind of the statewide aggregator of education. Right, they could be the holder of all of this material. So when people ask, they're directed to see that, or the CWC has the kind of the library, if you will, how to approach these things. Education for the industry, we thought was a role that CWC could play. So this is not specific to homeowners. This is specific to more so landscape contractors and installers, right? People who are ultimately doing this work, having the CWC be the body that kind of manages that information, and maybe helps with campaigns too. One of the things we talked about is, you know, we're all great at understanding the issues, but we may not be great at getting the issue out. So can CWC or CWCB spearhead a marketing campaign, so to speak, to really get the message out in a way that resonates with people? You know, having CWCB also can help with program sustainability, one on the financial side, but two, maybe helping programs prop up financial disparity as well with best practices from other communities. I think that's it. You know, just sitting there.
Great, is that team 2?
You are.
Okay. It was so long ago. And I won't take your first time to remember that. Okay, bring everything happens to you, and I'm gonna try to remember what.
Well, we really struggled with this because we couldn't come across a unified problem statement that we're trying to address. And so that kind of set us back a little bit. I would say that we did agree on transparency is a requirement for being able to define what our problem statement is, so that we don't want to be pulling the wool over people's eyes on what this transformation is looking to accomplish. We also felt that the water industry in general has a good degree of trust, and so we wanted to build on that trust and let people feel like they were buying into something that's quite effective. And I'm somewhat appreciative here because I'm not exactly sure. And we also kind of aligned with the whole idea that Patrick shared around trying things. So we did say education, we're learning as a group,
We're training users to be effective in their water use. And so we're, just like any commodity you buy, whether it's cell phone use, you have to train people how to use it effectively. Same thing with water. You kind of just expect that people know how to flush a toilet, take a shower, and wash their hands. Outdoor, you kind of leave it to them. You buy a house or something else, you're on your own. You don't have any idea what to do. And sometimes sales are more effective when there's simple strategies.
Okay, so we did, going back to our number one here, we did talk about that with turf replacement, that it is going to be really important for us to define the problems and our goals. What are we trying to achieve? Understanding that that may have more interconnectedness beyond just water savings. There's other components to that. And that it's really important that how we go about that process is going to be really key. Who are the stakeholders that are involved and how we collectively define that process. What else did we miss? We had alignment a lot about costs and benefits, interconnectedness with other goals for communities. What else? We had some really great discussions. So yeah, we did. We had 3 areas where we thought CWCB could play a role. The first one would be facilitating peer-to-peer connections and having some sort of programmatic mentorship process to allow people to share their successes and resources. And that may take quite a bunch of different forms. It could also be white papers, model documents, and case studies. And then we talked a bit about the state contractor training / certification issue, but we did talk that probably needs to be a more comprehensive look than just looking at should we be certified landscape contractors. We need to consider what certifications we have already, where are there gaps, how does that impact an industry that is primarily Hispanic? How do we actually develop the workforce once we've identified education and certification gaps? And yeah, that we just need to make sure we're mitigating any unintended consequences that would arise from a certification requirement. So I think we were all in alignment that this discussion keeps coming up, but we wanted to take a deeper dive into this really rather than just looking at should we be certifying contractors or not, and who's going to do it. We want to understand why we would be doing that, how we could do it effectively, and also make sure that we are looking at that issue through an equity lens. Okay, and then Frank, you want to take number 3?
Well, this speaks to some consistency expectations, where we would love to be able to have some of the same language across media sheds when we talk about different types of landscaping, what the problems are. Even some of the code for development is different. You talk to one city, it's Unified Development Code, then went to comprehensive plan. It gets a little bit difficult to assess. Did that include the same pieces? And so if we're talking about turf replacement, what are we seeking to achieve with that? And what will it look like in different areas? Is it always native grass? Is it a mix of something? So we're seeking to get some consistency and try to mimic some of the best we're calling it a water stewardship campaign, if you will, but some unification around the challenges we're facing and where we're trying to go. So it's not every single operator doing their own thing individually, which has the effect of confusing the public. And then when you're confused, you kind of disengage and just say, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to do what I normally do. Team, I'm reminded to ask you if you'd like to have anything. Paige? Okay.
All right, well, let's move this works. And
Oh, is it our turn? Sorry, it's kind of hard to hear. Yes. Can you guys hear me? Okay, good. I see a thumbs up. All right, I'm gonna go. All right, so let's see. Let me just scroll to the part. Okay, so for number 1, I think kind of the biggest thing that we talked about was just really figuring out how to prevent turf grass from going in the first place. So, you know, and specifically in areas that are, you know, non-functional. So just kind of drawing the line in the sand of not installing it in the first place, we're in areas that we would have to then go and remove it later on. And then, you know, really focusing on the fact that there needs to be flexibility, so that values and priorities and solutions really are unique to communities, and there's really not a one size fits all solution. You know, we talked a lot about maintenance needs and really making sure that there's maintenance plans in place, and that that's part of the conversation up front, so that we can actually realize the water savings later on by, you know, after the establishment period, that there's a plan for, you know, decreasing the you know, the watering, and that we know that it's gonna, you know, look attractive over a longer period of time. And then in relation to talking about, you know, through the lens of, I guess, like what is non-functional turf, that really, rather than looking at that, you know, Austin had the great point of really looking at, as a community, like what do we value in turf? Like, what do we need it to do? Like, what do we see as functional turf? And really kind of balancing this idea of like preserving functional turf, preserving it where we need, versus conservation, and focusing on what we save versus what we remove. And then, you know, I think that there's also, you know, an equity consideration here of making sure that we're supporting, you know, all members of our community in tackling these projects, and that there's, you know, kind of funding available, and that no one is sort of left out. We also talked about, you know, the chemical removal of turf, and really, as a community, we need to think creatively about alternate ways of killing grass, or even maintaining, you know, native grass, so that, you know, we're really keeping an eye on environmental and public health as we're tackling these projects. And, you know, a big topic kind of through all of our conversation was around cultural change, and figuring out how to change the mindset of, you know, what neighborhoods and towns look like, what it means to have a nice landscape, or what it means for a business park to, you know, be attractive, and that we really need to appeal to, you know, to other values, because, you know, water is still relatively cheap, and that overly focusing on water savings or cost might have, you know, an unintended consequence of people being disappointed in unrealized savings. And there's so many other benefits to these types of landscapes, whether it's attractiveness or pollinators, that there's really an opportunity to kind of focus more holistically, and kind of and focusing on the education piece of like what these types of landscapes bring to a community. And then I think we also, you know, talked about providing resources for communities to understand what different property types, you know, might bring to the equation. Like there might be a, you know, biggest bang for the buck, or something that is, you know, more difficult to tackle. But also coming up with a strategy for, you know, just because something's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And, you know, what are the strategy for each different property type that we might want to be converting. In terms of CWCB's role, we talked about focusing on HOA development being smarter. So, you know, we talked about like, you know, density bonuses or common areas as an opportunity, you know, and again, just sort of really hitting on this like idea of preventing turf from going in places that are undesirable. We also talked about, you know, the state supporting things that reduce chemical loading. So, you know, regulatory needs with what plants are treated with. So, you know, examples of coming out, not in support of plants that are treated with neonics, chemicals, not supporting chemicals, to remove turf, funding a guidebook, talking about, really creating more resources for communities that are tackling these things. And then again, this is sort of the big thing is just really, banning it from preventing it preventing it going back in, and then banning it in certain areas, just really saying like, this is where we're not going to put turf in the future. Let's see here. So under, well, I guess I'll just pause and see if any of my my committee members or had anything I missed or anything you want to add to question 1. Getting shaking hands. Okay. So then under question 2, so I think that we really talked here about how policies can support each other. And so really, enabling conversations across different departments and then, across regions and having statewide support. We talked about, really having education campaigns around, helping communities that are thinking about land use and really figuring out how there's so many resources out there and how to coalesce resources and then share them easily with communities. And then in terms of, let's see here. Yeah, so again, just making them easy to understand and readily accessible. And really, kind of having joint outreach efforts that help to educate, really just putting it in front of people at every opportunity. In terms of CWCB's role, we brainstormed around creating model ordinances and design standards for landscapes. And I think that was kind of the big one. I don't see anything else highlighted. Anything I missed on that one? That was a little bit shorter. All right.
So let's go in reverse order. We'll do team 2, question 2, and then we'll end with team 1. Back in this one.
We felt that it was necessary that any new development should reflect the same landscape expectations and standards that we're asking existing residents to employ. So that we don't have this inequality between people who are being asked to quote unquote sacrifice their existing landscape and make a significant investment, while then next door something goes in that looks like what they own in place. And I can speak to personal experience from that. I had a person who runs my organization give me a call one day and say, hey, how come that one over there is wall to wall turf? Right? And so that's a difficult question for me to go find out, because I had to understand what led to that decision to having people roll those saw pieces out everywhere. And so I think that people are pretty adept to having a sense of ownership over the landscape, whether it's commercial or residential, and feeling like they're going to do something different. And if other people aren't playing, well, try to be the comments, right? Would you like to add to that first moment? No? And so I think that also speaks to the equity lens in which we're seeing in general, whether it's a high income area or not. It's just generally people see the benefits of landscapes and they don't want to be losing something so somebody else can do. We talked a lot about water budgets, and I don't think we landed on an element of agreement beyond that they're aspirational in nature and they're very difficult. And so they're a tool in the toolbox, but they're not our first choice. And I'm summarizing, I think, for the team, but I think that they come with so much baggage that they might be kind of your last piece of the puzzle. There's other steps to take well beyond that, well before that. And there's a lot of things you can do you have to do to make them work. So I know that's difficult to hear, but it sounds simple in concept, it's difficult to implement. Yeah.
Okay, here we go. That in an ideal world, we would have mechanisms to hold water customers accountable for their use. So at the planning level, ensuring that their designs are meeting a good standard for water-wise landscaping, but then when they actually are built and developed, having a mechanism to ensure that if they overuse, they can be held accountable. I think that's, anybody else, team? Did we forget anything? Okay, Tim gives us a thumbs up. Anyone else? Okay, and then in terms of the role for CWCB, we did talk about the possibility of a irrigation annual budget, essentially for a definition of a waterways landscape. And then once again, we got into the complexities of that and realized that that could be a challenging ask. You know, how do you tailor that? What methodology are you going to use? Are you going to tailor that for different communities? And then what value does that bring coming from the state level versus doing that at the local level? So that's where we talked about. Anything else that our group would like to recommend to CWCB to take action on? Okay.
And last but not least, we'll close.
We can see that. Cool. All right, so we, let's see, one of the first things we thought would be beneficial for question 2 is really to make sure that everybody who's attempting to administer these are aligned, connected, and then maybe reconnected. We talked about examples of even internal departments in a representative city being at odds with what they should do relative to should they install a tree lawn, should they not? There were different aspects, different approaches, different rules really to that. And so alignment becomes critical. We also talked about external alignment as well. So from so you have to remind me what those agencies are. Yes, thank you. So making sure when a city or jurisdiction has a separate land use authority from a water provider, making sure there's alignment there as well to make sure the goal is met. And then the last one was to state the use as much as possible, right? So funding requirements, really make sure that the legislative authority has the goal aligned here, so that when they do make a funding request, it has the ability to go into perpetuity, right? This is not a one-off plan, right? It is a plan that's sustainable and resilient. And then the last thing again, we just hit on here was consistency. So programs and policy coordination that align with the ultimate goal. So, Drew, how do I do? Okay, I see one's up. CWC role. Really, again, we saw this as to be a funding source. So funding to get programs off the ground for cities. We saw, again, I think as we looked at this, we consider CWCB the kind of body of knowledge or the library, if you will, for people looking to achieve these programs. So maybe to assist in the setup of new programs. So kind of information clearinghouse, return on investment, ID specific areas for turf replacement. Again, best practices based on what they're seeing as the body of knowledge throughout the state. So people reporting back to what's working, and then CWC disseminating that information to people who want to change. And then data collection. Again, seeing it as this clearinghouse entity. So when people want to do this, they can come to CWC as essentially body of knowledge. Any further? Okay.
Great, Russell, get right on that.
You got this. Like, have that control.
It's done in September. All right. Thank you, everyone, and particularly for going a little over. Plans we will integrate all this into the report and share it with you, and we'll kind of bring this conclusion or discussion to a close, although many of these are going to flow into the next discussion, so I think it heated up relatively well. So that we'll build on how deep we got and probably move the recommendations that are kind of emerging as commonality into sort of deeper recommendations. So great, it was fascinating listening to all of you. So thank you for diving in to the hard work. I'm sure you're tired. Go take a walk through our downtown, it's really cute. They didn't pay me to say that. And we will see you in August on the 22nd. And pick up where we left off. So thank you so much. And I don't know if you want to close with anything or if that's good enough. All right. So yes, have a safe travel back wherever you're headed and whenever you're headed, and go look at the man-eating ball. We're really proud.
Thanks, everybody online.
Yeah.
And yes, you online for participating, and we look forward to seeing you in person. Should be looking this way, I guess. Yeah. All right, team break.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.